I am Naomi, 32 years old, and until last Friday, my family thought I was just the ungrateful dropout they could treat like garbage. I walked into my father's hotel gala, only to hear my stepmother speak into a microphone. Security, remove her. I left without a single word. Then I logged into my tablet and legally moved the hotel, the land it sat on, and $17 million into my private trust. Minutes later, 68 missed calls lit up my phone. By midnight, they were pounding on my door. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members. The grand ballroom of the Pierce Pearl, Atlanta's most iconic Black-owned luxury hotel, was dripping in crystal chandeliers and false promises. I had barely stepped through the gold-plated doors when two massive security guards suddenly flanked me. The smooth jazz music abruptly cut out, leaving a suffocating silence in the room. Standing on the grand staircase was my stepmother, Vivian, wearing a custom gown and a diamond necklace that had belonged to my late mother. She tapped the microphone, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "Security, remove her," she announced to the room. "This gala honors the Pierce generational wealth legacy. It is no place for dropouts who contribute nothing but embarrassment." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of Atlanta's elite. My half-sister Chloe stood just behind Vivian, her perfectly contoured face twisted into a cruel smirk. She was clinging to the arm of her husband Bradley Sterling, a white finance executive who constantly acted like he was the smartest person in any room full of black people. Bradley leaned over the banister, his racist microaggressions dripping with elite snobbery. "Careful on the way out, Naomi," he said. "That cheap suit is leaving lint on the Persian rug. Want me to call you a shared ride back to whatever hood you rent in?" I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not give them the satisfaction of a public meltdown. I calmly brushed the security guard off my shoulder and looked across the room at my father, Marcus. He was the nominal owner of the hotel, the patriarch who had spent decades letting Vivian treat me like an unwanted stray. When our eyes met, he cowardly looked down at his expensive shoes. I turned my attention back to my stepmother, my voice eerily calm, but projecting clearly across the dead, silent room. "Enjoy the spotlight tonight, Vivian," I said. "Enjoy the applause and the prestige, but mostly enjoy the very floor you are standing on." I walked out through the heavy doors, leaving a lingering sense of dread in my wake. The humid Atlanta night air hit my face as I stepped onto the pavement. Instead of hailing a shared ride, the driver of an armored Maybach pulled up to the curb and opened the rear door. I slid into the plush leather seat where my executive assistant was waiting. She handed me a tablet displaying a highly classified legal document. As I stared at the bright screen, a bitter memory flashed. I remembered sitting beside my mother Josephine's hospice bed as she took her final breaths. She squeezed my hand, knowing her time was up while my father was away in Paris, maxing out her credit cards to buy Vivian a designer bag. My mother knew exactly what kind of man she had married. That was why she quietly placed the land beneath the Pierce Pearl into a blind trust, set to transfer full ownership to me on my 32nd birthday. That birthday was exactly 3 days ago. For decades, the hotel had merely leased the land from my mother's estate. But Bradley, arrogant and blindly confident in his own superiority, had recently convinced my father to leverage a $17 million loan against the hotel for a tech expansion. That reckless move directly violated the strict terms of my mother's ground lease, triggering an immediate default condition that I had been patiently waiting for. "They wanted to talk about generational wealth," I whispered to myself, staring at the contract. "Let us talk about it." I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner on the screen. A green checkmark flashed instantly. Trust activated, lease terminated, debt recalled. By the time my driver pulled into the private underground garage of my penthouse overlooking the city skyline, the financial earthquake had already begun. I took the private elevator up, kicked off my heels, and poured myself a glass of neat bourbon. I sank into my velvet sofa and let out a long breath. Precisely 45 minutes after Vivian had ordered security to throw me out, my phone screen lit up. It was my father. I let it ring. A minute later, Vivian called. I ignored it. Then Chloe. Then Bradley. The phone began to buzz violently, practically vibrating off the marble coffee table. In the span of 20 minutes, the notification badge hit 68 missed calls. They were realizing that their entire empire was built on quicksand, and I had just pulled the plug. Then a text message from Bradley popped onto the screen, all his sophisticated corporate arrogance completely gone. "What on earth did you do to the banking portal?" he wrote. "The corporate accounts are showing a negative $17 million balance. The bank is threatening to freeze all operations and seize the assets. Pick up the phone right now." I took a slow sip of my bourbon, savoring the burn. I set the glass down and typed a simple reply. "I thought I was just an ungrateful dropout," I texted back. "Handle it yourself, finance bro." I tossed my mobile phone into the ice bucket, silencing their panic beneath freezing water. They had spent my entire life trying to push me out of my mother's legacy. Now they were about to learn what happens when the discarded scapegoat turns out to be the landlord who legally owns their entire world. The silence inside the Maybach was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the engine as we glided away from the Pierce Pearl. The neon lights of downtown Atlanta smeared across the tinted windows, painting the interior in rapid, colorful strokes. My assistant David sat across from me, his face impassive, but his eyes sharp. He took the iPad back as the green checkmark faded, securing the device in his briefcase. "Confirmation received from Vanguard Acquisitions, Ms. Pierce." He set his voice low and steady. "The bank has been notified. The $17 million debt is now officially ours, and the ground lease termination notice has been executed." I didn't reply immediately. I leaned my head back against the leather headrest, letting the reality of what I had just done settle over me. For 32 years, I had been the scapegoat of the Pierce family, the child of the first wife, the uncomfortable reminder of a past Marcus Pierce wanted to forget when he married Vivian, and her desperate need for high society validation. They had built their entire identity on the illusion of power, treating me as an unfortunate accessory they were forced to drag along. But illusion was a fragile thing, especially when built on someone else's land. My mother, Josephine, was a brilliant woman who saw right through Marcus's ambitions. She bought that prime commercial real estate long before it became the heart of Atlanta's luxury district. When she fell ill, she saw how quickly Marcus's eyes wandered to Vivian, a woman whose appetite for status was matched only by her lack of substance. My mother knew they would try to erase me. That was why she structured the blind trust so impeccably. The land was leased to the hotel, generating modest income, but the true power lay in the restrictive covenants. Marcus couldn't sell it. He couldn't develop it further without permission. And crucially, he could not leverage the hotel itself for massive debt without triggering a default that would instantly transfer full control back to the landowner. Me. Bradley Sterling had been the catalyst. Chloe's husband swaggered into our family with a degree from a mid-tier business school and an unearned superiority complex. He saw an aging black patriarch, eager to prove he was still relevant, and manipulated Marcus into taking out a massive $17 million loan. Bradley pitched it as a tech expansion, a way to modernize the Pierce Pearl and secure its future. In reality, it was a reckless gamble, a vanity project designed to inflate Bradley's own ego and line his pockets with consulting fees. He thought he was playing the naive locals. He didn't bother to read the ground lease carefully. He didn't know about the trust. He didn't know about me. The car pulled into the private underground garage of my building. David stepped out quickly, holding the door open. I bypassed the main lobby, taking the private elevator directly to the penthouse. The door slid open to reveal my sanctuary, a sprawling space of glass and steel starkly different from the ostentatious, cluttered mansion Vivian had curated. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, the gala was still happening. They were still drinking champagne, taking photos, patting themselves on the back for their imagined success, completely oblivious to the financial guillotine swinging down toward their necks. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the city lights. I didn't drink it right away. I just held the glass, letting the anticipation build. The execution of the trust wasn't just about reclaiming property, it was about dismantling a carefully constructed lie. It was about forcing them to see the woman they had spent a lifetime trying to minimize. The first tremor was about to hit, and I wanted to savor the exact moment the shockwave reached them. I set the glass down on the marble coffee table and retrieved my personal phone from my clutch. I had turned it on silent the moment I left the hotel. Now I watched the screen. It was currently 10:45 p.m. The banking systems would be updating their overnight ledgers. The automated alerts would be triggering. The financial officers at Marcus's bank would be scrambling, trying to understand how a $17 million loan had suddenly been classified as a hostile default and instantly transferred to a private equity firm. The phone sat there, a sleek black rectangle against the white marble. I waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The silence in the penthouse was thick, heavy with impending consequence. I picked up the bourbon, took a slow sip, and let the burn ground me. I had prepared for this moment for years, building Vanguard acquisitions from the ground up, moving in the shadows, learning the intricate dances of high finance while my family thought I was barely scraping by in a tiny apartment. At exactly 11 o'clock, the screen lit up. The vibration against the marble was sudden and violent. I looked down. The caller ID flashed Marcus Pierce. I watched it ring, the name flashing insistently. I didn't pick up. The ringing stopped, leaving a brief, heavy silence. Less than 30 seconds later, it started again. This time it was Vivian. I smiled, a tight, cold expression. The panic was setting in. They were realizing that the ground beneath their feet was no longer solid. They were realizing that the dropout they had just publicly humiliated held the keys to their entire existence. The phone vibrated again, then again, then again, a frantic rhythm of desperation that echoed through the quiet penthouse. The real show had finally begun. My phone screen went dark, plunging the penthouse back into the quiet hum of the city below. I sat there in the silence, the ice clinking softly against the glass, as I took another sip of bourbon. The warmth spread through my chest, a stark contrast to the cold, calculated precision with which I had just dismantled their financial security. For 32 years, I had been the family's dirty little secret, the uncomfortable reminder of a first marriage Marcus preferred to forget. They had paraded their wealth built on my mother's land while treating me like a charity case. Tonight, the charity had run out. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the glittering expanse of Atlanta. Somewhere out there, the gala was in ruins. The carefully orchestrated celebration of the Pierce legacy had devolved into a frantic scramble for survival. I could picture it clearly. Vivian, her face pale beneath her heavy makeup, screaming at the event staff. Chloe clinging to Bradley, demanding to know why her credit cards were suddenly declining. And Marcus, my father, realizing that the empire he thought he controlled had been built on a foundation of sand, a foundation I now owned. The satisfaction was undeniable, but it was tinged with a lingering sadness. It had not had to end this way. If they had shown even a fraction of the respect they demanded from others, if Marcus had possessed the backbone to stand up to Vivian's petty cruelty, things could have been different. But they had chosen their path, prioritizing superficial status over authentic connection, and now they were facing the inevitable consequences of their own arrogance. I finished my drink, the final drops tasting of victory and long overdue justice. While I stood there taking in the view, my private intercom buzzed. It was David, my assistant, calling from the secure line. "Boss," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "We have a situation at the building entrance." I walked over to the security panel mounted on the wall and pulled up the live feed from the lobby. The high-definition cameras captured a scene of escalating chaos. Bradley Sterling was standing at the concierge desk, his tailored suit rumpled, his face red with a mixture of rage and panic. He was shouting at Marcus, our head of security, gesturing wildly and jabbing a finger toward the elevator banks. Chloe stood slightly behind him, her hands covering her mouth, looking terrified. Vivian was pacing near the revolving doors, barking orders into her cell phone while my father stood frozen near the entrance, looking utterly defeated. "He is demanding to be led up to the penthouse," David reported. "He claims it is a family emergency. He offered Marcus $1,000 to bypass security protocol." I watched the screen as Bradley pulled a wad of cash from his money clip, slamming it onto the polished mahogany desk. Marcus, a retired Marine who had been with me since I started Vanguard, simply crossed his arms and shook his head, his expression impassive. Bradley's face contorted, and he slammed his fist down, rattling the decorative orchids. "Let him stew for another minute," I told David, "then patch me through to the lobby speakers." I watched the silent movie play out, observing the desperation they usually kept hidden behind country club memberships and VIP access. They were realizing that their usual tactics, bribery, intimidation, pulling rank, were completely useless here. I owned this building. I set the rules. "Patching you through now, Ms. Pierce," David said. I pressed the transmit button on the panel. My voice echoed through the expansive, marble-clad lobby, cool and authoritative. "If the gentleman in the wetsuit doesn't step off the premises in 10 seconds, I announced, have him arrested for trespassing." On the screen, Bradley froze. His head snapped up, searching for the source of the voice. His mouth opened and closed silently, the arrogant finance executive completely neutralized. Chloe grabbed his arm, pulling him back from the desk. Vivian stopped pacing her phone, dropping from her ear. My father looked directly at the security camera, a look of profound regret etched on his face. He knew he had lost. Marcus, our head of security, stepped forward, resting his hand on his radio. "You heard, Ms. Pierce," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It is time to leave." Bradley opened his mouth to argue, but Chloe pulled harder, practically dragging him toward the doors. "We are leaving!" she cried out, her voice shrill, even without audio. "Come on, Bradley, just go!" I watched them shuffle out of the building, stripped of their power and prestige, forced back out into the humid Atlanta night. The doors slid shut behind them, sealing my sanctuary. I tapped the screen, terminating the feed. The silence returned to the penthouse, absolute and unbroken. I poured myself one last glass of bourbon, raising it in a silent toast to my mother. The first battle was won, but the war was far from over. I knew they would regroup. I knew they would try to fight back. But I was ready. The dropout was finally running the board. I pressed the power button on the side of my phone and held it down. The screen went black, cutting off the endless stream of desperate notifications. The silence that followed was heavy and intoxicating. I walked away from the marble coffee table, leaving the dead device behind, and made my way into the master suite. I turned the brushed brass handles of the freestanding soaking tub, letting the scalding water roar into the basin. I poured in a generous amount of bergamot and cedar bath oil. The rich, earthy scent immediately filled the room, replacing the sterile smell of adrenaline that had followed me since I left the hotel. I stripped off the tailored suit Bradley had mocked just an hour ago. It was a vintage piece my mother had left me, worth more than his entire leased wardrobe. But men like Bradley only recognized wealth when it was screaming at them. I stepped into the water, feeling the heat seep into my muscles. For the first time in 32 years, my shoulders fully dropped. The knot of anxiety that had lived at the base of my neck since childhood began to dissolve. But I was not quite ready to look away from the fire I had started. I reached for the waterproof tablet resting on the bamboo bath tray. I tapped the security application linked to the building's external and lobby cameras. As the owner of the penthouse, I had unrestricted access to the surveillance feeds. The screen flickered to life, dividing into a grid of high-definition angles. The scene playing out on the street level below was a masterpiece of poetic justice. The news of the frozen accounts and seized assets had clearly reached the gala floor. The grand event had been abruptly aborted. Atlanta's elite were spilling out onto the pavement in a confused, chaotic mass. Women in expensive gowns clutched their wraps, whispering furiously to their husbands. Valets were sprinting back and forth, overwhelmed by the sudden mass exodus. Camera 4 gave me a perfect view of the sidewalk in front of my building. Vivian was standing near the curb, and the pristine high society mask she had worn for decades was completely gone. She was screaming at a terrified young valet. Even without audio, I could read the vicious, ugly shape of her mouth. She was waving her arms, her expensive diamond necklace catching the streetlights as she threw a tantrum because her driver was taking too long. This was the real Vivian. Strip away the stolen money and the stolen land, and she was just a bitter, grasping woman throwing a fit on a public sidewalk. A few feet away from her stood my father. Marcus Pierce had aged 10 years in the span of 45 minutes. He was pacing a tight circle on the concrete, one hand rubbing the back of his neck, the other holding a phone to his ear. He looked lost. The great patriarch, the man who had traded my mother's quiet brilliance for Vivian's loud mediocrity, was watching his legacy evaporate. He had leased his power, and the true owner had just foreclosed. I watched him drag a hand down his face, looking utterly defeated. I felt a brief hollow pang in my chest, but it was quickly washed away by the memory of him staring at his shoes, while Vivian ordered security to throw me out. Then my eyes shifted to camera one, the feed covering the main lobby of my high-rise. The heavy glass doors slid open, and Bradley Sterling stormed inside. He looked like a man who had just been electrocuted. His custom Tom Ford suit, the one he wore like a suit of armor to intimidate people, was rumpled and sticking to him. He was sweating profusely, his face flushed an angry mottled red. Chloe was nowhere to be seen, likely left crying on the sidewalk. Bradley marched directly up to the concierge desk. Standing behind the polished stone counter was Jamal, the night shift security supervisor. Jamal was a massive, soft-spoken black man with a military background and absolutely zero tolerance for entitled tantrums. I tapped the audio feed for the lobby, the sound kicking in with a soft static hiss over the splashing of my bathwater. "I demand to be led up to the penthouse immediately," Bradley barked, slamming his hand flat on the desk. "You tell Naomi Pierce to open her door right now. This is a family emergency." Jamal did not flinch. He looked at Bradley with a calm, unbothered expression that clearly infuriated my brother-in-law even more. "Ms. Pierce is not accepting visitors," Jamal said, his voice deep and entirely unaffected by Bradley's volume. "I'm going to have to ask you to step outside, sir." "You do not understand who I am," Bradley sneered, leaning over the desk. The racist, classist undertones dripping from his voice were unmistakable. "I am an executive vice president. I manage hundreds of millions of dollars. I am telling you to let me up that elevator before I have your job." Jamal crossed his massive arms. "Sir, you are currently trespassing on private property. If you do not exit the building, I will have you removed." Bradley scoffed a desperate, wild sound. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, silver money clip. He peeled off several crisp $100 bills and slammed the wad of cash onto the desk, pushing it toward Jamal. "Here, take it. It is probably more than you make in a week. Just give me the override key for the elevator. Look the other way for 5 minutes." I watched Jamal look down at the cash, then slowly back up at Bradley. "Put your money away, sir," Jamal said softly, the warning in his tone clear as a bell. "I am calling the police." Bradley's face contorted into something ugly and violent. He reached across the desk, looking as though he was about to grab Jamal's radio. That was my cue. I sank deeper into the hot water, feeling the bubbles tickle my chin. I tapped the microphone icon on the application, routing my audio directly into the lobby's overhead speaker system. I kept my voice perfectly level, icy, and smooth. "If the gentleman in the wetsuit does not step off the premises in 10 seconds, have him arrested for trespassing." My voice echoed through the expansive, high-ceilinged lobby. On the screen, Bradley froze mid-lunge. He jerked his head upward, his eyes wide and wild as he searched the ceiling for the source of the sound. The sheer humiliation of realizing I was watching him, that I held all the cards and was treating him like an unruly vagrant, crashed over him. His face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "Naomi," he screamed at the ceiling, his voice cracking. "You cannot do this. You are ruining everything. We will sue you. We will take you down." 10. I counted softly into the microphone. 9. 8. Jamal stepped out from behind the desk, his physical presence immediately dwarfing Bradley. He pointed a steady finger toward the exit. "Time to go, sir." Bradley looked at Jamal, then up at the camera chest, heaving. For a second, I thought he might actually try to fight, but the cowardice that lived beneath his corporate bravado won out. He snatched his money off the desk, his hands shaking violently, and turned on his heel. He practically ran toward the sliding glass doors, nearly tripping over his own expensive leather shoes. I watched the external feed as he stumbled back out onto the street, shoving past a group of confused gala guests. I tapped the microphone icon off, cutting the connection. The screen went silent again. I set the tablet back onto the bamboo tray and closed my eyes, letting the steam rise around my face. The panic outside the gates was beautiful, but the peace inside was even better. The morning sun glared off the floor-to-ceiling glass of the Vanguard Acquisitions headquarters, a beacon of modern architectural power in the heart of Atlanta's financial district. Chloe and Bradley stormed past the frantic receptionist, their faces twisted in a mixture of exhaustion and rage. They had clearly spent the entire night scrambling, and Bradley's designer suit was hopelessly wrinkled, dark circles hanging heavily under his eyes. They marched down the executive corridor, expecting to find me huddled in a tiny cubicle. For years, I had let them believe I was a low-level data entry clerk just scraping by. They thought they could simply barge in, yell at my supervisor, and intimidate me into submission. Instead, Bradley shoved open the heavy oak double doors at the end of the hall, and they both stopped dead in their tracks. The CEO's corner office was expansive, decorated in sleek midnight blue and brushed steel with panoramic views of the city skyline. I sat behind a massive custom-cut obsidian desk, sipping a cortado. Flanking me were two sharp corporate lawyers, Evelyn Carter and Marcus Hayes, both looking up from their tablets with mild amusement. Chloe's jaw dropped. She looked from the designer furniture to my tailored Alexander McQueen suit, her brain entirely failing to process the reality in front of her. "What is this?" Chloe stammered, her voice shaking as she clutched her expensive handbag like a shield. Bradley, recovering his arrogant bravado, stepped forward. He slapped his hands flat on my desk, leaning over in a textbook display of corporate bullying. "Listen to me," Bradley growled, attempting to mansplain his way out of a financial death spiral. "I do not know what kind of cyber trick you pulled with your little hacker friends, but interfering with corporate banking is a federal offense. You are playing with big boy money now. Reverse the freeze, and I will convince Marcus not to press charges." I did not even blink. I took another slow sip of my coffee, savoring the silence that stretched painfully across the room. I set the cup down and gestured to Evelyn. Without a word, my lawyer slid a thick, leather-bound dossier across the obsidian glass toward Bradley. "I strongly suggest you open that before you threaten my client with federal charges." Evelyn said, her tone smooth and entirely devoid of sympathy. Bradley scoffed, but his eyes darted nervously. He snatched the dossier, flipping it open. Chloe stepped up beside him, peering over his shoulder. I watched the remaining color drain completely from Bradley's face as his eyes scanned the top page. "You see, Bradley," I said, leaning back in my chair. "When you convinced my father to leverage a $17 million loan against a hotel that sits on my land, you assumed I was just a ghost. You assumed you were the smartest person in the room. But I have been auditing the Pierce Pearl's ledgers for the past 6 months in preparation for my trust activating. That dossier is a comprehensive forensic accounting of where exactly that $17 million went." Chloe looked up, her perfectly contoured face contorted in confusion. "It went to the tech expansion. Bradley hired contractors." "He hired shell companies, Chloe," I corrected gently, keeping my eyes locked on Bradley's sweating face. "Companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. Companies of which your husband is the sole beneficial owner. He did not modernize the hotel. He funneled $9 million directly into his private offshore accounts, blew $3 million covering his bad crypto investments, and used the rest to pay off his gambling debts." "That is a lie," Bradley shouted, his voice cracking as he slammed the dossier shut. "This is fabricated. You forged these documents." Marcus Hayes, my second attorney, tapped a stylus against his screen. "The FBI White-Collar Crime Division disagrees, Mr. Sterling. We filed a suspicious activity report at 7 o'clock this morning, complete with wire transfer receipts, IP logs, and offshore account routing numbers. Your passport has already been flagged. Chloe gasped, stepping away from her husband as if he had caught fire. Bradley, tell me this is a lie. Tell me you didn't steal from my father. Bradley ignored her, his eyes wild with panic as he stared at me. The arrogant executive facade was completely gone, replaced by the desperate realization of a trapped animal. Naomi, please. We can make a deal. I can pay it back. Just give me time to liquidate some assets. You do not have any assets to liquidate, I replied, my voice turning to ice. Turn to page 4. Bradley's hands shook violently as he reopened the folder and flipped the pages. Chloe leaned in again, and this time a sharp, ragged sound escaped her throat. When you needed collateral to satisfy the bank's initial risk assessment for the fraudulent loan, I explained, letting every word hang in the air. You put up your own residential property, the Buckhead estate, the one my father bought for Chloe as a wedding gift. You forged my signature, Chloe shrieked, shoving Bradley's shoulder. You leveraged my house. The bank is going to take my house. The bank already took it, I clarified. Remember, Vanguard Acquisitions purchased the entirety of the defaulted debt last night. Which means I own the debt. I own the hotel. And as of this morning, I own the deed to your Buckhead estate. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises before my private security team removes your belongings and changes the locks. You cannot do this to me, Chloe screamed, tears finally spilling over her lashes, ruining her makeup. I am your sister. You are the woman who stood on a staircase last night and laughed while your husband told me to take a shared ride back to the hood. I reminded her, feeling absolutely zero remorse. You stood by while Vivian tried to erase my mother's legacy. You thought you were untouchable because you married a man who promised you the world, but he bought it with my money. Bradley lunged forward, grabbing the edge of my desk as if he wanted to flip it over. You vindictive witch, I will destroy you. Before he could move an inch further, the heavy oak doors opened again. 2 uniformed police officers stepped into the room, followed closely by Vanguard's head of security. The officers looked directly at Bradley. Bradley Sterling, the taller officer asked, stepping forward with a pair of handcuffs already unclipped from his belt. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. Bradley froze, his bravado entirely shattered. He looked at Chloe, but she backed away, wrapping her arms around herself, staring at him with pure disgust. The officers grabbed his arms, spinning him around and clicking the cold metal cuffs securely around his wrists. He did not fight them. He just stared at the floor, his chest heaving. Read him his rights, I said softly, picking up my coffee cup. As they led him out of the office, his Miranda rights echoing down the hallway, Chloe stood entirely alone in the center of the vast room. She looked small, terrified, and completely stripped of her high society armor. She looked at me, a silent plea for mercy in her eyes. I simply turned back to my lawyers, opening a new file on my tablet. Evelyn, I said, ignoring Chloe entirely. Draft the eviction notice for the Buckhead property and get Vivian and Marcus on the phone. It is time to discuss the terms of their surrender. Evelyn, my lead corporate attorney, pushed the heavy leather-bound dossier across the polished obsidian glass of my desk. It stopped exactly 1 inch from Bradley Sterling's white knuckles. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Chloe stood paralyzed near the doorway, her designer handbag clutched against her chest like a life preserver. Bradley stared at the folder, his chest heaving, his arrogant sneer faltering just a fraction as the reality of the room began to sink in. He had stormed in here, expecting a cubicle and a frightened data entry clerk. Instead, he was standing in the corner office of the CEO of Vanguard Acquisitions, surrounded by high-priced legal muscle. I leaned forward slowly and steepled my fingers, resting my elbows on the cool surface of the desk. Big boy money, Bradley, I asked, letting the question hang in the air. Let us talk about it. Bradley opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a single hand, silencing him instantly. You came into my office throwing around words like cybertrick and hacker. You assumed that because I am a black woman who did not follow your traditional approved corporate path, the only way I could access a banking portal is by breaking into it illegally. That assumption alone shows exactly why you are in this position. You never do your due diligence. You never look past the surface of anything or anyone you consider beneath you. I gestured toward the dossier. Open it, Bradley. Read the first page. He did not move. His eyes darted nervously between my face and the folder. Read it. I commanded, my voice dropping an octave, carrying the absolute authority of a woman who held his entire future in her hands. With trembling fingers, he flipped open the heavy cover. He stared at the top sheet of paper. It was a certified copy of a commercial ground lease dated 30 years ago, bearing my late mother's signature and my father's signature. That document, I explained smoothly, proves that Marcus Pierce does not own the land beneath the Pierce Pearl. My mother, Josephine, purchased that real estate long before my father built his precious hotel. When she realized exactly what kind of man she had married, she placed that land into an ironclad blind trust. The trust stipulated that full ownership would transfer to me on my 32nd birthday. That birthday was last week. Chloe finally found her voice. Her tone was shaky, defensive. What does that have to do with the bank freezing our accounts? I shifted my gaze to my half-sister. It has everything to do with it, Chloe. Because the ground lease came with strict, restrictive covenants. One of those covenants explicitly prohibited leveraging the hotel for massive commercial debt without the landowner's consent. Any violation triggers an immediate default, terminating the lease and transferring all structures on the property to the landowner. Bradley's face went completely slack. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. He stared at the legal jargon on the page, the Wall Street bravado rapidly evaporating. You convinced Marcus to take out a $17 million loan. I continued, my voice steady and surgical. You fed him a line about a revolutionary tech expansion to modernize the hotel. But we both know that was a lie. You thought you could walk into a wealthy black family, dazzle an aging man with some Wall Street buzzwords, and drain our assets right out from under us, did you not? You thought we were just unsophisticated new money ripe for the picking. That is a lie. Bradley stammered, his voice lacking any of its former volume. We were going to invest that money. We had plans for a massive infrastructure overhaul. Do not insult my intelligence, I snapped. My forensic accountants have spent the last 12 hours tracking every cent of that loan. You routed it through 3 different shell companies registered in Delaware. You used the Pierce family name to secure capital that you fully intended to siphon off for your own vanity projects. You treated my family's legacy like your personal piggy bank because you genuinely believed you were the smartest person in the room. You looked at my father and saw a mark. You looked at Vivian and saw a gullible socialite. You looked at me and saw a discarded dropout. Bradley swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. He closed the dossier, pushing it back toward me slightly, as if the paper itself were burning him. Okay, he said, his voice dropping into a desperate, placating register. Okay, Naomi, you proved your point. You own the land, but the bank still holds the note on the $17 million. If you terminate the lease, the bank seizes the hotel. We all lose. If you reverse the termination, I can talk to the loan officers. We can restructure the debt. I can fix this. He was still doing it. He was still trying to mansplain his way out of a crisis, still assuming I needed him to save me from a financial situation he created. I looked at Evelyn, my lawyer, and we shared a brief, knowing glance. I shook my head slowly, feeling a cold smile spread across my face. You are not listening, Bradley. You still think you are negotiating with a subordinate. You still think the bank is your biggest problem. I stood up from my chair and walked slowly around the desk. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor, the sound sharp and echoing in the quiet office. I stopped a few feet away from him, looking him dead in the eye. When you violated the terms of the ground lease, I explained the bank was legally obligated to call the $17 million loan in full. They panicked. A defaulted loan of that size on commercial real estate is a nightmare for their quarterly reports. They wanted the debt off their books immediately. So my firm made them an offer. Bradley stopped breathing. His eyes widened, pure terror finally breaking through his denial. Vanguard Acquisitions did not just enforce the lease, I said, dropping the ultimate bombshell. We stepped in and purchased the debt. We bought the entire $17 million note from the bank at a premium the very second it defaulted. No, Bradley whispered, shaking his head. No, that is impossible. You do not have that kind of capital. You are just a dropout. I smiled, a lethal flash of teeth. I am not a hacker, Bradley. I am your primary creditor. I own your debt. I own the land beneath the hotel. I own the hotel itself. And as of this morning, because you personally guaranteed that loan to push it through faster, I own you. Chloe let out a choked sob, backing away from her husband as the absolute devastation of his actions settled over the room. Bradley reached out to grip the back of a leather guest chair, his knuckles turning white as his legs seemed to give out. The man who had mocked my clothing, my intelligence, and my existence less than 24 hours ago was now completely at my mercy. And he knew with terrifying certainty that I possessed exactly none. Chloe, finally understanding the gravity of the situation, turns to her husband in horror. Bradley, you said that $17 million was invested in a secure offshore tech portfolio. You said it was doubling. I chuckle. It is a dry, hollow sound that barely disturbs the heavy silence of the corner office. I rest my hands on the thick leather dossier, my manicured nails tapping rhythmically against the cover. I look at my half-sister, observing the frantic pulse jumping at the base of her throat. Chloe has spent her entire life insulated by Marcus Pierce's wealth, completely shielded from consequence, accountability, and the ugly realities of the men she chooses to align herself with. A secure offshore tech portfolio, I repeat, tasting the absolute absurdity of the phrase. Is that what he told you, Chloe? That is a remarkably creative fairy tale for a man who lacks the basic mathematical comprehension required to balance a standard checking account. I flip the dossier open. The crisp parchment pages rustle loudly. Evelyn and Marcus, my two corporate attorneys, sit perfectly still, watching the execution with clinical detachment. Let us review the true trajectory of Bradley's brilliant investments. I say, running my index finger down a column of highlighted wire transfers. There was no tech portfolio. There was never an offshore technology fund. There was only a deeply insecure man trying to buy his way into a league he did not belong in. According to our forensic audit, Bradley used the hotel's leveraged cash to pay off a massive underground sports gambling debt. I pause to let the word hang in the cold air-conditioned space. Gambling. Chloe whispers, her voice cracking. Massive, I confirm, flipping to the next page. He lost $3 million over a single weekend in Macau. He wired another $4 million to an unregistered holding company in Malta, which our investigators have identified as a front for an international sports betting syndicate. He was betting on overseas soccer matches, unregulated boxing rings, and thoroughbred horses. Your husband was bleeding cash faster than he could embezzle it. Bradley's face is a ghastly shade of gray. His mouth opens, but no sound comes out. He looks like a fish suffocating on dry land. The arrogant executive who had slammed his hands on my desk just moments ago has completely vanished. But that is only half the money. I continue, smoothly turning another page. When the bookies started demanding their funds, Bradley panicked. He realized the hotel ledgers were going to reflect a massive, unexplainable deficit. So in a desperate, deeply foolish attempt to hide his tracks and recoup his catastrophic losses, he funneled the remaining $8 million into a decentralized cryptocurrency exchange. I slide a printed graph across the obsidian glass desk. It shows a steep red line plunging directly towards zero. He purchased unregulated digital assets, worthless coins pumped up by internet scammers. He thought he could launder the stolen money, double it in a day, and put the principal back before my father noticed. Instead, the market crashed. Those assets lost 99% of their value within 48 hours. He literally set my family's money on fire. He legally robbed the Pierce family blind. Chloe begins to hyperventilate. The sound is ragged, sharp, and frantic. Her chest heaves violently beneath her designer silk blouse. She takes a staggering step away from Bradley, looking at him as if he has suddenly mutated into a monster. You lied to me, she gasps, her perfectly manicured hands flying up to grip her own hair. You lied to my father. You told us you were building a financial empire. Bradley finally snaps out of his paralyzed state. He reaches for her arm, his face contorted in a pathetic mask of desperation. Chloe, sweetheart, listen to me. I was trying to secure our future. Marcus was being too conservative. I just needed one big win. Do not touch me, she shrieks, slapping his hand away with resounding force. You bankrupt my family. You ruined my life. You ruined it yourself by being stupid enough to trust him, I interject, my voice slicing through their domestic meltdown. I push my chair back and stand up. The leather groans softly in the quiet room. I smooth the front of my tailored suit and walk slowly around the massive desk. Every step is deliberate, measured, and entirely unhurried. I am not the outcast daughter anymore. I am the predator, and they have walked willingly into my cage. Speaking of lies, Chloe, I say, stopping just 3 feet away from her trembling frame, let us talk about your lifestyle. She looks at me, her tear-streaked eyes wide with a new kind of terror. What? What do you mean, the vintage Porsche you drove here today? I say, tilting my head slightly. The custom silver 911 parked in the executive visitor lot downstairs. The one you flaunted at the country club all summer. My father bought me that car, she stammers, clutching her leather handbag tightly against her chest, as if it can protect her. Marcus did not buy you anything. I correct her, feeling a dark, satisfying thrill at the destruction of her illusions. He leased it. And according to these ledgers, the monthly payments for your luxury vehicle are tied directly to the hotel's corporate expense account. Chloe blinks, the words not quite penetrating her panic. So what? So that account is completely overdrawn, I explain, speaking slowly as if addressing a slow child. It is entirely bankrupt. And because Vanguard Acquisitions purchased the entirety of the hotel's defaulted debt last night, that corporate account now belongs to me, which means the lease on that vehicle is my property. I extend my right arm, holding my open palm in the space between us. As the new primary creditor restructuring this bankrupt entity, I will be taking those keys now. Chloe stares at my empty hand. Her breathing is shallow and rapid. The reality of her situation is finally crashing down with the weight of a collapsing skyscraper. She is not just losing her wealth. She is losing her status, her transportation, her very identity. She looks at Bradley for help, but he is staring at his own shoes, completely broken and useless. I said the keys, Chloe. I snap my fingers once, a sharp, commanding crack that makes her jump. Hand them over. With trembling, reluctant hands, Chloe unclasps her designer bag. She rummages blindly for a moment before her fingers close around the heavy metal key fob. She pulls it out, the silver Porsche crest gleaming under the recessed lighting. She looks at it, a fresh wave of tears spilling down her cheeks, before slowly dropping it into my waiting palm. The keys hit my hand with a solid, satisfying clink. I close my fingers around them, sliding them into my suit pocket. Thank you, I say, offering a thin, chilling smile. Now the receptionist will validate your parking, but since you no longer have a vehicle, I suggest you ask her to call you a cab. A standard one. I do not think you can afford a premium ride anymore. My mother, Josephine, was a visionary. I continued, catching the keys in my palm and wrapping my fingers around the cool metal. She did not just buy the land. She envisioned an empire. Before Marcus ever broke ground on the first building, she filed the paperwork. The pierced pearl, the logo, the specific Pantone color of the signage, even the proprietary font used on the hotel stationery. She trademarked all of it under a holding company that rolled directly into my trust. Bradley stared at me, the color rapidly draining from his already pale face. His mouth opened and closed silently, struggling to form a coherent defense against an attack he had never seen coming. Marcus has been paying licensing fees to my trust for 30 years, I said, leaning forward to ensure every word hit its mark. He leased the land and he leased the brand. He owns nothing but the debt you piled onto his shoulders. You hitched your wagon to a man who was renting his entire life. The silence in the room was absolute. Evelyn and Marcus, my attorneys, watched the exchange with the clinical precision of predators observing a mortally wounded animal. Bradley shook his head, a frantic, jerky motion. "You are lying." He spat, his voice devoid of its earlier thunder. "Marcus built that brand. He is the face of Atlanta real estate. You cannot just steal a legacy." "I am not stealing anything," I corrected sharply. "I am reclaiming what was stolen from my mother. Call him." "Go ahead, Bradley. Call your father-in-law. Put him on speaker. Let us see what the great Marcus Pierce has to say." I gestured toward the phone clutched in his shaking hand. Bradley hesitated, his eyes darting frantically between me and the lawyers. The certainty that had anchored his entire privileged existence was fracturing. With a trembling thumb, he unlocked his screen and dialed. He pressed the speaker icon and dropped his hand to his side. The line rang once, twice. Then a hollow, exhausted voice filled the vast office. "Bradley," my father answered. He sounded like a man calling from the bottom of a very deep well. "Marcus, tell me she is lying," Bradley demanded, his voice cracking with desperation. "Naomi is sitting here claiming she owns the brand. The Pierce Pearl. Tell me you own the trademarks. Tell me you have the legal right to the name." A heavy, agonizing pause stretched over the line. I could hear the faint sound of city traffic in the background of Marcus's feed, a stark reminder that he was likely still standing on the sidewalk outside the building he no longer controlled. "She owns it," Marcus said finally. The words were a death knell. "Josephine secured the intellectual property before we even opened the first location. It was part of the original trust agreement. I have been leasing the naming rights from the estate." Bradley let out a sound that was half gasp and half sob. "You knew. You knew we were leveraging an asset you did not even own. You let me secure a $17 million loan against a hotel that is completely encumbered by a blind trust. You told me it was a guaranteed return." My father shot back, a sudden spark of defensive anger flaring in his voice. "You told me your tech investments were foolproof. You said the loan would be repaid before the quarterly audit. You lied to me, Bradley." "I lied to you," Bradley screamed, completely losing whatever shred of composure he had left. "You paraded around Atlanta like a king. You let Chloe and Vivian spend money like water. You presented yourself as a billionaire, and you are nothing but a tenant. You ruined me. You ruined yourself." I interrupted, my voice cutting through the speakerphone shouting match like a sharp blade. The line went dead quiet. "Marcus," I said, addressing the phone directly, "I want you and Vivian out of the penthouse by noon tomorrow. Leave the keys with the concierge. If you take so much as a single piece of artwork that my mother purchased, I will have you arrested for theft. Do you understand me?" A long, raspy exhale echoed from the device. "Naomi, please. We can talk about this. Vivian is beside herself. We have nowhere to go on such short notice." "That sounds like a personal problem," I replied flatly. "You spent 30 years living in luxury while pretending I did not exist. You watched your wife treat me like the help. Your time is up. Noon tomorrow." I reached across the desk and tapped the screen of Bradley's phone, terminating the call. The dial tone buzzed briefly before fading into silence. Bradley stood frozen, staring at the black screen of his phone as if it had just bitten him. The reality of his situation had fully materialized. He had no money, he had no house, he had no powerful father-in-law to bail him out. He had committed massive financial fraud to fund a gambling addiction, and the only person standing between him and a lengthy prison sentence was the black woman he had spent years openly despising. "What do you want?" he whispered, his shoulders sagging in absolute defeat. "I want you to leave my office," I said, sitting back down and steepling my fingers. "My firm will be submitting the full forensic audit to the Securities and Exchange Commission as well as the FBI. Your passports have already been flagged by the authorities. I suggest you spend whatever hours of freedom you have left finding a very good, very cheap defense attorney." Bradley opened his mouth, perhaps to beg, perhaps to hurl one final insult, but the fight had completely left his body. He was an empty shell of a man. He turned slowly, his expensive shoes scuffing against the polished floor, and walked toward the heavy oak doors. He looked small, insignificant, and utterly broken. Evelyn pressed a button on the intercom. "Security, please escort Mr. Sterling out of the building. Do not let him stop at the restroom or make any calls. Straight to the street." The doors swung open, revealing two massive security guards waiting in the corridor. They flanked Bradley, immediately guiding him away without a single word. The heavy doors closed behind them, sealing the office in a pristine, victorious quiet. I let out a long, slow breath. The tension that had coiled tight in my chest since the moment I initiated the freeze finally began to unravel. I looked down at the silver Porsche keys resting on the obsidian glass. "Excellent work, Evelyn Marcus," I said, shifting my gaze to my legal team. "The trap closed perfectly." "They made it incredibly easy, Ms. Pierce," Marcus replied, a rare, genuine smile crossing his face. "Arrogance is always the most predictable liability." "What is the next step?" Evelyn asked, pulling up the master schedule on her tablet. "The corporate accounts are frozen, the residential properties are in the foreclosure process, and the criminal referrals have been filed. Now," I said, a deep sense of satisfaction warming my blood. "We rebrand, draft the press release. I want it sent to every major news outlet and financial publication in Atlanta by 5 o'clock today. Announce that Vanguard Acquisitions has executed a hostile takeover of the Pierce Pearl due to gross financial mismanagement and executive fraud." "And the new name?" Marcus asked, his stylus poised over the screen. "The Josephine," I said, honoring the woman who had truly built the empire. "By Monday morning, I want Marcus Pierce's name erased from every building, every letterhead, and every bank account in this city." The ink on the rebranding order was barely dry when my secure private line blinked. The caller ID displayed my father's personal number. I answered, routing the audio through the office speakers so my legal team could hear. Marcus did not bother with pleasantries or apologies. He bypassed logic entirely and went straight for a calculated, desperate threat. He claimed he had his crisis management team on standby with a drafted press release. The headline, he promised, would frame me as an unstable, estranged daughter attempting a hostile and entirely illegal takeover of a historic landmark. He told me he would use every media connection he had cultivated over the past 30 years to destroy my reputation before I could even set foot in my newly acquired hotel. "We are going to settle this like adults," Marcus commanded, his voice adopting that faux paternal authority he used to intimidate junior board members. "Dinner at the house, tonight at 8. Come alone." Evelyn and Marcus Hayes stared at the phone, shaking their heads in silent disbelief at his audacity, but I smiled. I told him I would be there. I knew exactly what this was. It was the final pathetic gasp of a dying empire trying to maintain the illusion of control. It was time to end their delusions permanently. The wrought iron gates of the Pierce family estate swung open at exactly 8 o'clock that evening. I drove my car up the winding, manicured driveway, taking in the sprawling brick mansion illuminated by dramatic landscape lighting. This house was a monument to stolen wealth. Every marble pillar, every imported chandelier, every blade of perfectly cut grass had been paid for by the profits generated from my mother's land. A uniformed butler opened the heavy double doors, leading me silently down the echoing hallway to the formal dining room. The room was suffocatingly opulent. A massive crystal chandelier cast a harsh, brilliant light over the 20-seat mahogany table. Marcus sat at the absolute head of the room, positioned like a king holding court. Vivian sat precisely to his right, her posture rigid, her hands folded tightly over her lap. She wore a high-collared silk blouse and her signature pearls projecting a sickening aura of pristine superiority. There was no food on the table. There were no plates, no crystal water glasses, no silverware. The dinner invitation had been a complete farce. The only items present were a thick stack of legal documents and a heavy gold Mont Blanc pen resting in front of a single empty chair at the exact opposite end of the table. They wanted me as far away from them as physically possible, separated by a long sea of polished wood. I did not sit down. I walked slowly along the side of the table, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Marcus watched my approach, a muscle ticking in his jaw. He steepled his fingers, leaning forward to project an air of unshakable dominance. "Naomi," he began, his voice dipping into a rich, manipulative baritone. The Pierce Pearl is not just a building, it is a beacon of Black excellence in Atlanta. It is our legacy. He paused, letting the heavy words hang in the quiet room. He was weaponizing our race and our history, attempting to use the struggles of past generations to cover up his own spectacular financial incompetence. Our ancestors fought for a seat at the table. Marcus continued, his tone rising with theatrical passion. They bled to build institutions that could withstand the systemic pressures designed to keep us down. We have spent decades building a brand that represents power, dignity, and generational wealth. And you are letting petty childish jealousy destroy everything we have built. You are acting recklessly, playing games with assets you do not understand, and threatening to hand our legacy over to corporate vultures. Vivian nodded sagely beside him, playing the role of the supportive matriarch flawlessly. Her face was set in an expression of deep, manufactured disappointment, as if she were mourning the moral failing of a wayward child. Blood must protect blood, Marcus declared, his eyes locking onto mine with desperate intensity. The hypocrisy of the statement was almost physical. He dared to speak to me about blood protecting blood when he had spent his entire adult life erasing my mother's existence and treating me like a shameful secret. He stood up, resting his hands flat on the polished mahogany. He tapped the thick stack of paper with his index finger. "These are debt forgiveness contracts drafted by my legal team," he ordered. "You need to sign them right now. You will release the freeze on the corporate accounts, you will transfer the defaulted debt back to a manageable restructuring plan, and you will back away from the ground lease. If you sign this tonight, we will brush this entire mourning under the rug. We will keep the family name intact, and I will ensure you receive a generous monthly stipend for your trouble." I looked at the papers, then at the gold pen, and finally at the two people who genuinely believed they could still dictate the terms of my existence. They were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the insecure, neglected girl to take the pen and shrink back into the shadows. I looked at Vivian, letting my gaze travel from the top of her heavily sprayed hair down to the expensive pearls resting against her collarbone. I let the silence stretch across the long dining table, watching the vein in her neck pulse with uncontrolled rage. "I do not disrespect you because I have money, Vivian," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly, even a stark contrast to her shrill panic. "I disrespect you because you are a parasite. You did not bring class to this family. You bought access with funds you siphoned from a dead woman's estate." Vivian gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a theatrical display of outrage. "How dare you speak to me like this in my own home?" "This is not your home," I corrected sharply. I pulled a sleek silver tablet from my briefcase and placed it on the mahogany table. I tapped the screen once, bringing up a highly detailed series of banking ledgers. "The mortgage on this estate, the payments for your exclusive country club memberships, the catered galas, the political donations you love to brag about." I listed, watching her eyes track the glowing screen. Every single cent came from the Pierce Pearl's operational accounts, accounts that were legally bound to pay dividends directly into my mother's trust. "You have been living a billionaire lifestyle on a millionaire's budget, funding your vanity through blatant embezzlement." Marcus slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the heavy gold pen he had placed in front of my empty chair. "Enough of this nonsense." He pointed a trembling finger at me, trying to summon the terrifying patriarch figure of my youth. "You will sign these debt forgiveness papers right now, Naomi. You think you are clever, but you do not understand the real world. If you walk out of here without signing, I will call Richard Vance, the editor of the Atlanta Chronicle. I will have my press release published before you reach the end of the driveway. I will tell the entire city you are a mentally unstable, estranged daughter trying to illegally seize a Black cultural landmark. You will be a pariah. No one in this town will ever do business with Vanguard Acquisitions again." I looked at the great Marcus Pierce, seeing him truly for the first time. He was not a titan of industry. He was a terrified aging man clutching at sand. "You are going to call Richard Vance at the Chronicle?" I asked, feigning mild curiosity. Marcus puffed out his chest, mistaking my calm demeanor for hesitation. "Yes. Richard and I have played golf every Sunday for 15 years. He owes me. He will print exactly what I tell him to print." I smiled, a slow, lethal curving of my lips. I picked up the gold pen he had set out for me, twisting it between my fingers. You should definitely call him, I suggested softly. But you might get his voicemail. Richard stepped down as editor-in-chief 3 hours ago. Marcus froze. His aggressive posture faltered, replaced by a sudden sickening doubt. What are you talking about? Vanguard Acquisitions does not just deal in distressed real estate, Marcus. We specialize in media consolidation. I dropped the gold pen onto the table. It landed with a heavy final clack. My firm finalized the purchase of the holding company that owns the Atlanta Chronicle yesterday afternoon. Richard Vance took a very generous early retirement package this morning. The new editor-in-chief is a woman named Sarah Jenkins. She is fiercely independent, highly ethical, and she reports directly to my board of directors. Vivian let out a strangled noise, sinking back into her chair, as if her legs could no longer support her weight. There will be an exclusive piece running in tomorrow's morning edition. I continued, my voice slicing through the deadly quiet of the dining room. But it will not be your fabricated press release. It is a fully documented, highly detailed investigative report on the financial collapse of the Pierce Pearl. It exposes the fraudulent $17 million loan, Bradley Sterling's illegal offshore gambling, and the 30 years of embezzlement orchestrated by you and your wife. The article includes high-resolution copies of the original ground lease and the trademark registrations, proving to the world that the true visionary behind the empire was Josephine Pierce. Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The color had completely vanished from his face, leaving an ashen, grayish pallor. He stared at me, his eyes wide and vacant, as the reality of his total destruction finally registered. You are going to prison, Vivian whispered, looking at her husband with pure terror. Marcus, she is going to send us to prison. I am not sending you anywhere, I corrected. I am simply refusing to protect you from the consequences of your own actions. You wanted to settle this like adults, Marcus. This is what the adult world looks like. I reached into my briefcase one last time and pulled out a single crisp manila envelope. I tossed it across the vast expanse of the mahogany table. It slid to a stop right over the debt forgiveness papers he had tried to force on me. What is that? Marcus choked out, his voice hoarse and broken. That is a formal notice of foreclosure on this estate, I stated. Since you paid for this mansion using stolen corporate funds from a company I now own, this property is subject to asset forfeiture. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. Vivian let out a piercing, hysterical wail. She grabbed the edge of the table, her perfect posture crumbling into a messy, undignified heap. 72 hours. We cannot pack a 30-room house in 72 hours. Where will we go? What about my clothes? My jewelry? You can take whatever you can fit into the trunk of a reasonably priced rental car, I replied coldly. Everything else stays. The artwork, the furniture, the diamonds you bought with my mother's money. It all belongs to Vanguard Acquisitions now. If you attempt to remove a single asset, I will have the police waiting at the gates to arrest you for grand larceny. Marcus stared at the envelope, his hands trembling violently. You are my daughter, he whispered, the words sounding like ashes in his mouth. How can you do this to your own flesh and blood? I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing, no anger, no sorrow, no lingering desire for his approval. The void he had created in my life was finally filled with complete and utter closure. I remember being 14 years old, standing in the kitchen of this very house asking you for money to attend a summer coding camp, I said quietly. You told me the family business was going through a tight quarter, and I needed to be realistic. The very next day, you bought Vivian a $70,000 tennis bracelet. You taught me the value of $1, Marcus. You taught me that my education was worth less than her jewelry. I turned my back on them and walked toward the grand entryway. The echoing sounds of Vivian's sobbing and Marcus's ragged breathing followed me down the long, opulent hallway. I pushed open the heavy front doors and stepped out into the cool Atlanta night. The air tasted clean and crisp. I looked up at the stars, knowing my mother's vision was finally secure. But as I reached for the door handle of my car, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a high-priority message from my lead attorney, Evelyn. We have a massive problem. Bradley just made a deal with the feds. I stand slowly, the heavy mahogany chair scraping sharply against the marble floor. I pull the linen napkin from my lap and toss it casually onto my untouched porcelain plate. I look down at Vivian, watching the frantic pulse at the base of her throat flutter against her expensive pearls. You brought class, Vivian. Let us see how much class you have when you are broke. Vivian's mouth snaps shut. The severe, arrogant lines of her face slacken into something resembling shock. I lean forward, planting my palms flat on the dining table, invading her pristine, curated space. The galas, the politicians, the country club memberships. I continue, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating air of the dining room. Do you honestly believe those people respect you? They respect the open bar you provide. They respect the blank checks you write for their silent auctions. The second that money dries up, you will be a ghost in this city. You will not even get past the security gates of your own social circles. Without my mother's money funding your vanity, you are absolutely nothing. Vivian opens her mouth to scream, but I do not give her the chance. I turn my attention back to Marcus. He is gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles bone white, his chest heaving beneath his tailored suit jacket. He looks like a cornered animal, desperate and rapidly running out of oxygen. The false bravado he had projected just moments ago is cracking, fracturing under the weight of his own profound miscalculations. You threatened to ruin me to protect the brand. I say, my tone dropping to a deadly quiet register that echoes off the crystal chandelier above us. You threatened to paint me as an unstable woman destroying a historical landmark. But here is the fatal flaw in your entire existence, Dad. I walk slowly toward his end of the table, my heels clicking methodically against the hardwood floor. The copyright for the Pierce Pearl, the logo, the font, the specific shade of gold on the awnings, none of it belongs to you. It was registered by my mother prior to your marriage. She saw exactly who you were even back then. She anticipated your greed. She placed every single piece of intellectual property into the exact same trust as the land. Marcus opens his mouth to speak, but only a ragged, shallow breath escapes. He reaches blindly for his wine glass, his hand trembling so violently that the dark red liquid sloshes over the crystal rim, staining his fingers. You only retained the right to use the name as long as the ground lease was in good standing. I explain, dropping the final legal hammer with surgical precision. It was a standard licensing clause hidden in plain sight. A clause you arrogantly ignored for 3 decades because you truly believed you were untouchable. By defaulting on the lease, you did not just lose the property, you forfeited the licensing rights in their entirety. Marcus brings the glass to his lips, his eyes wild and unfocused, but my next words stop him cold. Tomorrow morning at exactly 6 o'clock, contractors are arriving at the hotel. They are bringing industrial cranes. They are going to strip your name off the top of that building letter by giant letter. They are removing the brass plaques from the lobby, the monograms from the glass doors, and the signage from the street. You have nothing to protect, Marcus. You have no legacy. You are a tenant who got evicted, and I am taking my mother's name off your stolen property. Marcus gasps, the wine going down the wrong pipe. He drops the crystal glass. It shatters against the table, sending jagged shards and deep red wine flying across the polished wood and onto his crisp white shirt. He clutches his chest, choking violently. His face turns a dangerous mottled shade of crimson. He coughs a harsh, wet, agonizing sound, struggling to draw air into his lungs as the reality of his total ruin crashes down upon him. Vivian shrieks, jumping back as the spilled wine narrowly misses her silk dress. She looks at her husband, hacking and gasping for breath, but she does not reach out to help him. Her self-preservation instincts have entirely overridden her fake devotion. She looks at me, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. 30 years, I say, my voice perfectly steady over the sound of Marcus's ragged coughing. 30 years of forcing me to walk through the service entrance. 30 years of telling the world I was a distant, troubled relative, while you built a monument to your own ego on the soil my mother purchased. Marcus finally catches his breath. His eyes are watering, his chest heaving with the sheer physical exertion of his panic. He slumps back in his grand, oversized chair, the illusion of the powerful patriarch completely and permanently shattered. He looks pathetic. He looks small. Naomi, he wheezes, his voice stripped of all its former booming authority. You cannot do this. That building is my life's work. The city knows me as the Pierce Pearl. If you take the name down, the investors will pull out of every other development project I have in the pipeline. It will trigger a cross default across all my portfolios. I will be wiped out. You are already wiped out, I state coldly, feeling a deep, profound sense of closure settling into my bones. Bradley's gambling debts guaranteed the financial collapse, but your own staggering hubris guaranteed the public humiliation. The press release you threatened me with, I strongly suggest you throw it away. My legal team has already drafted the real story. The financial publications will receive the court filings regarding your intellectual property reversion by midnight tonight. Vivian grips the back of her chair, her knuckles turning white. She looks at Marcus, her mask of the supportive high society wife dissolving into raw, ugly panic. Marcus, what is she talking about? Vivian demands, her voice shrill and trembling. Cross defaults. The other projects. You told me the residential properties were shielded in a separate holding company. You swore to me our lifestyle was secure. Marcus does not answer her. He cannot even bring himself to look at her. He just stares at the spilled wine soaking into the white linen, watching his empire bleed out. I offer Vivian a thin, razor-sharp smile. Did he forget to mention that part, Vivian? The corporate accounts were frozen this morning. The debt Vanguard Acquisitions purchased includes the collateralized loans tied to this very estate. You have been funding this lavish lifestyle through the hotel's operating budget. Without the hotel, you cannot afford the mortgage on this dining room, let alone the staff standing in the kitchen. Vivian lets out a strangled, breathless sound. She stares at her husband, the man she married for power and status, and realizes she is tethered to a sinking ship. The grand, imposing patriarch has been reduced to a silent, shaking old man waiting for the bank to take his house. I pick up my purse from the adjacent chair, the soft click of the clasp echoing sharply in the devastating quiet of the room. I leave you both to your evening, I say, turning my back on the wreckage of their lives. You have a lot of packing to do. And Vivian, when you are boxing up those Birkin bags, remember that they were bought with a patch of dirt. I walk out of the dining room, my footsteps steady and measured. I do not look back. I walk down the grand hallway past the imported tapestries and the marble statues straight out the heavy front doors. The cool night air hits my face, washing away the stagnant, suffocating atmosphere of the Pierce estate. The game is over. I have not just leveled the playing field, I have demolished the stadium. The next morning, the sky over Atlanta was clear and brilliantly blue, a sharp contrast to the storm that had raged the night before. I sat at a corner table in the formal dining room of the Oakmont Country Club, sipping espresso. I was not a member, but the club manager owed Vanguard Acquisitions a favor after a quiet restructuring of their defaulted expansion loan last year. My phone chimed. It was Evelyn. The target has entered the building. She requested the private executive suite on the second floor. Excellent, I replied softly. I will be right up. Ensure the recording devices are active. I finished my espresso, smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer, and walked up the grand staircase. The country club was quiet, the mid-morning lull, offering a sense of privacy that Vivian desperately craved for this transaction. I approached the heavy mahogany doors of the executive suite. Two men from my acquisitions team, Thomas and David, were already inside playing the role of interested buyers. I pushed the door open. The thick carpet absorbed the sound of my footsteps. Vivian sat at the head of the conference table, her back to me. She was wearing a Chanel suit, her hair perfectly styled, but there was a frantic energy in the way she held her pen, a tightness in her shoulders that betrayed her panic. Thomas was speaking. Mrs. Pierce, we have reviewed the financials for your event planning firm, Thomas said, his tone professional and detached. Vanguard Acquisitions is prepared to offer you $3 million for your 30% stake. However, given the expedited nature of this transaction, we require immediate transfer of the voting rights along with the equity. $3 million is significantly undervalued, Vivian protested, her voice carrying that familiar haughty edge. My firm handled the mayor's inaugural ball. We have exclusive contracts with half the city's elite. The brand association alone is worth 5. The brand association is currently a liability, Mrs. Pierce, David countered smoothly. Given the impending forensic audit of the Pierce Pearl and the subsequent media coverage expected this week, your family name is rapidly depreciating. 3 million is a generous offer under the circumstances. Take it or leave it. Vivian gripped the edge of the table. I could see the internal struggle playing out in the rigid lines of her posture. She needed the money. Marcus's accounts were frozen, the mansion was under foreclosure, and she needed cash to secure legal representation before the federal indictments dropped. Fine, Vivian snapped, snatching the contract and aggressively signing her name on the dotted line. You have your equity. I want the funds wired to my personal account by the close of business today. I am afraid that is not going to be possible, Vivian. I spoke clearly, my voice carrying across the quiet room. Vivian froze. The pen slipped from her fingers, clattering against the polished wood. She turned slowly, her eyes wide, staring at me as if I were an apparition. Naomi! She breathed, the color draining completely from her face. What are you doing here? I walked forward, picking up the signed contract from the table. I glanced at the signature, a sharp, elegant scrawl, and handed it to Evelyn, who had silently entered the room behind me. I am conducting business, I replied, taking the seat directly across from her. You requested a rapid acquisition from Vanguard. As the CEO and majority shareholder, I felt it was only appropriate to handle the transaction personally. Vivian's mouth opened and closed. She looked at Thomas and David, who were quietly packing up their briefcases. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. You own Vanguard, she stammered, her hands trembling as she clutched her designer handbag. I do, I confirmed, offering a small, cold smile. And according to this contract, Vanguard now owns 30% of your event planning firm, including the controlling voting rights you so graciously surrendered to secure a quick payout. You tricked me, Vivian shrieked, jumping to her feet. This is fraud. You deliberately concealed your identity to steal my company. There was no deception, Vivian. Evelyn interjected, her legal tone calm and precise. You approached Vanguard Acquisitions. You signed the contracts willingly. The corporate structure of Vanguard is a matter of public record. A simple background check would have revealed Ms. Pierce's ownership. The fact that you failed to conduct basic due diligence is not grounds for fraud. Vivian stared at us, her chest heaving. The reality of her situation was finally penetrating the thick layer of entitlement she had worn like armor for 30 years. Why? She whispered, her voice cracking. You already took the hotel. You took the house. Why take this? Because you used my mother's money to build it, I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You used the embezzled funds from the hotel's operating budget to launch your firm. Every gala, every politician, every ounce of class you claim to have brought to this family was paid for with stolen cash. I stood up, resting my hands on the table, leaning in close. And about that wire transfer, I continued, savoring the moment. Since the funds you used to establish the business were acquired through criminal activity, the SEC requires that the purchase price be held in escrow until the federal investigation is complete, which means you are not getting a dime today. You sold your company for absolutely nothing. I step into the room, smoothing the front of my tailored charcoal blazer. The ambient country club music playing softly through the overhead speakers suddenly feels entirely too loud in the dead silence that engulfs the dining room. Bradley freezes mid-sentence. His jaw hangs slack. The arrogant, chest-puffing posture he had assumed for the high-powered executives instantly evaporates. Vivian lowers her martini glass so fast the clear liquid sloshes over the rim, staining the pristine white tablecloth. What are you doing here? Vivian demands, her voice shrill, instantly reverting to the haughty matriarch defending her territory. Security! She looks wildly toward the hallway. How did she get in here? Thomas. My lead acquisitions director closes the heavy mahogany doors, sealing us inside. He steps to the side, pulling out the grand leather chair at the head of the table. I do not break eye contact with Vivian as I walk the length of the room and take my seat. David, my chief financial officer, takes the chair to my right, opening his sleek leather briefcase with a synchronized, terrifying efficiency. No one is calling security. Vivian, I say, resting my forearms on the polished wood. I arranged this meeting. I paid for this room. And I am the one you have been desperately trying to contact since 8 o'clock this morning. Bradley scoffs. It is a harsh, incredulous sound, but the panic in his eyes betrays him. Do not be ridiculous, Naomi. We are here to meet with the senior partners of Vanguard Acquisitions. You probably followed us here to cause a scene. Go back to your hotel before I have you arrested for corporate espionage. David slides a crisp, embossed folder across the table. It stops perfectly in front of Bradley. I suggest you read the articles of incorporation, Mr. Sterling. David says, his voice devoid of any emotion. Vanguard Acquisitions is a privately held firm. Ms. Pierce is the founder, majority shareholder, and acting chief executive officer. You are looking at the only senior partner who matters. Vivian's face drains of all color. She looks like she has just been struck by lightning. She stares at the Vanguard logo on the folder, then up at me, the reality of her nightmare finally taking root. You, she whispers, her hands shaking so violently she has to place them flat on the table to steady herself. You are Vanguard. You bought the hotel debt. I bought the debt. I bought the ground lease. And now I am here to buy you, I reply, leaning back in my chair. I reach into the center of the table, my fingers brushing against the lavish arrangement of white orchids and hydrangeas. With a sharp tug, I pull a small black rectangular device from deep within the foliage. I set the audio recorder on the table between us. Before we discuss your equity, Bradley, I want to address your restructuring plan. I say, tapping the device. It takes a very specific breed of coward to spend 30 years living off a black man's wealth, only to call him an old black fool the second his pockets run dry. Bradley lunges forward, his face turning a mottled, dangerous red. He reaches for the recorder, but Thomas intercepts him, slamming a heavy hand onto Bradley's shoulder and forcing him forcefully back into his seat. Touch my property again. Bradley and Thomas will break your wrist. I state, my voice dropping to a glacial calm. Do you really think I would walk into a room with a desperate cornered rat without taking precautions? This device streams directly to a secure cloud server. The file is already safely stored. I imagine Marcus will find your plans to throw him into an assisted living facility incredibly fascinating. Or better yet, maybe I will leak this audio to the Atlanta Chronicle. The city's elite would love to hear how the cultured, sophisticated Bradley Sterling truly views the black community he leeches off of. You set us up! Vivian shrieks, her voice cracking. You orchestrated this whole thing to humiliate us. You humiliated yourselves, I counter, shifting my attention to my stepmother. I just provided the venue. Now let us talk about your luxury event planning firm. Your intake forms indicate you are looking to sell your 30% stake to raise capital for a legal defense fund. You evaluated your share at $3 million. Vivian lifts her chin, desperately trying to summon the remnants of her shattered pride. Yes. And that is a bargain. My firm handles the most exclusive galas in the state. We have contracts with the governor's office. You have nothing. I correct her, snapping my fingers. David immediately produces a thick stack of forensic accounting reports, sliding them toward Vivian. According to our audit, I explain your event firm has not turned a legitimate profit in 7 years. You kept the business afloat by funneling money directly from the Pierce Pearl's corporate marketing budget into your private accounts under the guise of consulting fees. It is textbook embezzlement. That is a lie, Vivian stammers, but she refuses to look at the ledgers. It is a federal crime, David corrects her sharply. Now that Vanguard controls the hotel's finances, those consulting fees have been permanently terminated. Your firm is completely insolvent. You have massive outstanding debts to vendors, caterers, and florists. Without the hotel's stolen money to prop you up, your business is bankrupt. I fold my hands on the table, watching the devastation wash over her. She is no longer the queen of Atlanta high society. She is a fraud sitting in a borrowed room, realizing her crown is made of tin. I am not buying a functioning business, Vivian, I say softly. I am buying a crime scene. Therefore, my valuation of your 30% stake differs slightly from yours. I reach into my blazer pocket, pull out a crisp single $1 bill, and place it on top of the acquisition contract. I slide the paper across the mahogany table until it rests against her fingertips. $1, I announce. That is my final offer. Vivian stares at the dollar bill as if it were a venomous snake. She begins to hyperventilate, her chest heaving as she looks from the money to my face. Are you insane? I need $3 million. We need lawyers. The SEC is going to seize our accounts. You cannot offer me $1. I can, and I just did, I reply smoothly. If you sign this contract, Vanguard assumes your 30% stake, and more importantly, we assume the legal liability for the firm's outstanding vendor debts. You walk away with nothing, but you also walk away without civil lawsuits from 50 different florists and caterers. If you refuse, I will forward this forensic audit directly to the FBI Fraud Division before I finish my lunch. Bradley grabs the contract, his eyes scanning the aggressive terms. He looks at Vivian, his face twisted in panic. Sign it, Vivian. If she gives that audit to the feds, they will add embezzlement to the wire fraud charges. We will both go to prison for 20 years. Sign the paper. Vivian looks at her husband, the man who was supposed to elevate her status, now begging her to surrender her entire identity for a single dollar bill. She picks up the pen, her hand shaking so badly she can barely grip the metal barrel. A tear, hot and humiliated, slips down her cheek, ruining her perfect makeup. She presses the pen to the paper and signs her name, legally signing away the last piece of her fraudulent empire. David retrieves the contract, inspects the signature, and places it securely into his briefcase. He leaves the $1 bill sitting on the table. A pleasure doing business with you, Vivian, I say, standing up from my chair. Oh, and you should probably keep that dollar. I hear the vending machines in federal holding facilities are quite expensive. I turn and walk out of the VIP room, leaving them alone with the echoes of their ruin. I reach into my tailored blazer pocket, retrieve a crisp, unwrinkled $1 bill, and place it flat on the polished mahogany table. I slide it forward with my index finger until it stops precisely against the edge of Vivian's diamond tennis bracelet. The green paper sits there, a glaring, almost comedic insult against the backdrop of the luxurious country club dining room. Vivian stares at the dollar bill as if it is a venomous snake. Her chest rises and falls in rapid, shallow breaths. She looks at me, her eyes wide, entirely stripped of the arrogant superiority she has worn like armor since the day she married my father. You are completely out of your mind, Bradley shouts, stepping forward and slamming his hands down on the table. He tries to summon the imposing, aggressive energy he uses to bully his way through life, but his voice cracks. This is extortion, Naomi. We are not selling a multi-million-dollar firm to you for pocket change. We will take you to court. We will sue Vanguard into the ground. Extortion implies you have something of value to take, Bradley, I reply, keeping my voice perfectly level. You do not. You have a corporate carcass. I did not just review Vivian's event planning books. I reviewed your offshore accounts. I know exactly where the money from the Pierce Pearl's operational budget went. You funneled millions through shell corporations in the Caymans to pay off your gambling debts, and Vivian used whatever was left to buy her way onto charity boards and country club committees. You are running a high society Ponzi scheme. Bradley's face turns a dangerous mottled shade of crimson. He glances nervously at the closed double doors, suddenly hyper-aware of the silence in the room. I know about your little meeting this morning, Bradley. I continue watching his false bravado shatter into a million irreparable pieces. I know you sat in a cramped room in a federal building and tried to cut a deal with the FBI. You thought you could trade Marcus for immunity. You thought you could walk away clean by handing them your father-in-law. Vivian whips her head around to stare at her husband. Her impeccably styled hair shifts, revealing the sheer terror in her eyes. You went to the feds, she shrieks, her voice piercing the heavy air. You tried to turn on my husband behind my back. He tried to save his own skin, I correct her smoothly. But he failed. I lean back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. The federal agents only offered you a proffer agreement because they assumed you possessed the master ledgers detailing the embezzlement. They thought you held the smoking gun. But you only gave them fragments, Bradley. You gave them the sanitized version. I, however, gave them everything. Vanguard Acquisitions submitted the complete unredacted financial records to the Federal Fraud Division 2 hours ago. Your immunity deal is void. You are not a cooperating witness anymore. You are the primary target. Bradley stumbles backward, his legs hitting the edge of a heavy leather chair. He sinks into it, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The realization that he has been entirely outmaneuvered, that his desperate attempt at betrayal has only accelerated his own destruction, renders him completely mute. Vivian turns her frantic gaze back to me. She reaches out her manicured fingers hovering over the $1 bill. "If we sign this," she whispers, her voice shaking so badly the words barely form. "If we sell the firm to Vanguard for $1, what happens to the debt? What happens to the IRS? Vanguard absorbs the corporate entity I state clinically. We assume the firm's liabilities. We pay the vendors you defrauded. We settle the outstanding tax liens. You walk away with absolutely nothing, but you walk away without an IRS audit dragging you into a federal tax evasion charge. You avoid prison for this specific crime, but the second you sign that paper, you are locked out. Your name is removed from the corporate registry. The event planning firm ceases to exist. Your access to this country club, your seats at the charity galas, your invitations to the mayor's dinner, all of it vanishes today." Vivian looks around the private dining room, taking in the crystal chandeliers, the imported floral arrangements, the velvet drapes. This room represents everything she values in the world. It is the life she stole from my mother, the status she built on a foundation of lies and stolen money, and I am forcing her to sell it all for a single piece of paper. "I will not do it!" Vivian snaps, a sudden, desperate surge of defiance lighting up her eyes. "I will call my friends. I will call the board members. They know me. They respect me. I will borrow the money to fight you." I smile, a slow, lethal curving of my lips. I pick up my phone and tap the screen once. "You should definitely call them Vivian. But you might want to know that Vanguard Acquisitions just finalized the purchase of the holding company that owns this exact country club." I look toward the heavy mahogany doors. The club manager is currently standing right outside that door, waiting for my signal to formally revoke your membership due to unpaid dues. I have also frozen your accounts at the club. The martini you are drinking right now, you cannot even afford to pay for it. Vivian lets out a strangled, pathetic noise. She looks down at the acquisition contract lying on the table next to the dollar bill. Her entire reality has been dismantled, reduced to a stark, inescapable binary choice: federal prison or total social annihilation. "Sign the contract, Vivian, I command." My voice slicing through her panic with absolute authority. "Take your dollar and leave." Or I walk out that door, I hand the remaining ledgers to the IRS, and I let them tear you apart piece by piece. Bradley leans forward, his hands trembling violently as he grabs a gold pen from the center of the table. He shoves it into Vivian's hand. "Sign it." He chokes out, his voice raw with terror. "Sign the paper, Vivian. We have no choice." Vivian stares at the pen. A tear slips down her cheek, leaving a dark streak of mascara in its wake. She presses the tip of the pen to the signature line. Her hand shakes so violently the ink barely marks the page at first. Then, with a defeated, ragged sob, she signs her name. She legally signs away her fraudulent empire, her status, and her stolen identity. Bradley snatches the pen from her and scribbles his own signature on the witness line, completely surrendering. I calmly reach across the table and pull the contract toward me. I check the signatures, fold the heavy parchment, and slide it into my briefcase. I leave the $1 bill exactly where it is. "It is entirely fitting," I say quietly, looking at the two broken people sitting in front of me. "You built your entire life treating people like they were disposable. You thought wealth bought you immunity from consequence. But true wealth is not about stolen money, Vivian. It is about leverage. And you just sold your entire life to the daughter you spent 30 years trying to erase." I stand up, straighten my blazer, and walk toward the double doors. I do not look back. I push the heavy mahogany doors open and step out into the hallway, leaving Vivian and Bradley alone in the quiet, empty room, staring at a single dollar bill. Vivian stares at the crisp $1 bill resting on the polished mahogany table, her manicured hands trembling with a sudden, desperate surge of defiance. Her pride flares up a final foolish attempt to hold on to the illusion of her power and status. I will not be humiliated by you. Vivian spits out her voice, rising to a shrill crescendo as she pushes the acquisition contract away. I will take my business elsewhere. I will file for bankruptcy before I sell my life's work to you for $1. I look at her feeling no anger, only a profound, chilling exhaustion at her endless capacity for self-delusion. I let out a slow, deliberate sigh and shake my head. I snap my fingers without breaking eye contact. Evelyn steps forward from the shadows of the room. She drops a second, significantly thicker binder onto the table. The heavy thud echoes like a gunshot in the silent, tense air of the executive suite. This is not just about debt, Vivian. I say, my voice dropping to a lethal razor-sharp register. This is forensic accounting. I reach out and flip open the heavy cover of the binder. Page after page of highlighted bank transfers, offshore routing numbers, and falsified invoices stare back at her. I watch the remaining color drain completely from her face, leaving her looking hollow and aged. We found the ghost accounts. I continue tapping a manicured finger against a particularly damning spreadsheet. We know exactly what you did with the Josephine Pierce Foundation. You did not just embezzle from the hotel's operating budget. You skimmed hundreds of thousands of dollars from a charity foundation specifically established to provide scholarships and community grants for underprivileged Black youth in Atlanta. You stole from children, Vivian. You siphoned off their futures to fund your shopping sprees in Paris, your custom Italian sports cars, and your endless vanity projects. Bradley gasps, stumbling backward, as if he has been physically struck. He looks at his wife with genuine, unfiltered horror. Vivian, tell me she is lying. He chokes out, his voice thick with panic. Tell me you did not touch the foundation money. That is a federal mandate. That is wire fraud. Vivian cannot speak. Her mouth opens and closes, but no sound emerges. Her eyes remain locked on the detailed ledgers, the undeniable proof of her utter moral bankruptcy laid bare under the harsh, unforgiving lighting of the country club suite. You used my mother's name to solicit donations from the city's elite. I say, the cold fury finally bleeding into my words. You hosted galas, smiled for the cameras, and claimed you were uplifting the community. Then you wired those exact donations to an untraceable account in the Caymans to pay for your lavish European vacations. You are not just a parasite, you are a predator. I lean in close, planting my palms flat on the table, forcing her to meet my gaze. My eyes lock onto her terrified, trembling face. Sign the paper for $1, I command softly, the threat hanging heavy and absolute in the space between us. Sign it right now, or my legal team walks this binder straight to the FBI field office down the street. It is less than a 10-minute drive from here. Let us see how much your country club friends visit you in a federal penitentiary. Let us see how your high society circle reacts when they realize you funded your wardrobe with stolen charity money. Vivian looks around the room, her eyes darting frantically. She looks at Bradley, seeking a lifeline, a defense, anything. But Bradley is completely broken. He is backing away from the table, physically distancing himself from her, his own survival instincts kicking in. He knows the foundation fraud is a line no high-priced lawyer can ever successfully defend. You cannot do this to me, Vivian, whispers, her voice breaking into a ragged sob. I am your family. I raised you. You occupied space in my house? I correct her instantly, my tone merciless. You never raised me. You merely tolerated my existence while you picked my mother's legacy clean. Your time is up, Vivian. You have 10 seconds to make a choice. I tap my watch. 10. Vivian lets out a loud, ugly wail. The pristine, untouchable socialite dissolves into a messy, weeping heap. Her perfect posture collapses completely. 9, 8, 7. She lunges for the gold pen resting beside the binder. Her hands are shaking so violently that she drops it twice before she can properly grip the metal barrel. It's 5. Weeping uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face and ruining her expensive makeup, Vivian drags the pen across the signature line. The ink smears slightly under the moisture of her tears, but the signature is legally binding. She presses the pen down so hard on the final loop that the thick parchment paper nearly tears. She signs her entire empire away, surrendering her business, her status, and her unearned wealth. I reach out and pull the contract toward me. I examine the signature, ensuring every page is initialed properly. Then I pick up the single crisp $1 bill and slide it directly in front of her. Payment in full, I state coldly. Vivian stares at the dollar bill, her chest heaving with deep, racking sobs. She wraps her arms around herself, rocking slightly back and forth in the heavy leather chair. Evelyn swiftly gathers the binders, sliding the signed contract into a secure, waterproof folder. David closes his briefcase with a sharp final click. "You are destroying this family." Bradley mutters, his voice weak and defeated as he stares blankly at the floor. "Marcus will never recover from this. You are tearing down everything he built." Marcus tore it down himself the day he decided his ego was more important than his integrity. I reply without bothering to look at him. I am simply clearing away the debris. I turn toward the door, my heels sinking into the plush carpet. As I grasp the heavy brass handle, I pause and look back over my shoulder at the two of them. They look incredibly small, sitting in the vast, opulent room that they no longer have the right to occupy. "The transition team will be at your event planning offices within the hour." I inform Vivian, my tone strictly business. "They will be seizing all hard drives, physical files, and corporate assets. I strongly suggest you do not attempt to return to the premises. Security has already been instructed to deny you entry." Vivian does not answer. She just continues to weep, clutching the edge of the table, as if it is the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. I push the heavy doors open and step out into the hallway. The country club is still quiet, the distant clinking of silverware and soft jazz music drifting up from the main dining room below. It is the sound of a world Vivian Pierce no longer belongs to. I walk past the club manager, who gives me a polite, knowing nod. I step out into the bright Atlanta sunlight, pulling my phone from my pocket. I dial the private number for Sarah Jenkins, the new editor-in-chief at the Atlanta Chronicle. She answers on the first ring. "Ms. Pierce." Sarah says, her voice sharp and ready. "Run the story, Sarah," I instruct her, walking toward my waiting car. "Run the full investigative report. The embezzlement, the ground lease default, the charity fraud. Everything. The Pierce Pearl belongs to Vanguard now, and the city needs to know exactly why." "Consider it done," she replies. "It will be the front page exclusive for the evening digital edition." I end the call and slide into the back seat of my car. The engine purrs to life. I look out the tinted window at the manicured lawns of the country club, feeling a profound, absolute stillness wash over me. The ghost of my mother's ambition has finally been laid to rest. The empire is clean. And the true visionary behind the Pierce Pearl will finally get the recognition she was always denied. I slide the signed paper across the polished mahogany table to Evelyn, who slips it seamlessly into her leather briefcase. The crisp snap of the briefcase lock echoes like a final gavel strike in the quiet dining room. I turn my gaze slowly, deliberately away from Vivian's sobbing form and fix my eyes entirely on Bradley. Bradley shifts under my scrutiny. He clears his throat desperately, trying to salvage whatever scrap of masculinity and power he believes he still possesses. He squares his shoulders aggressively, straightening his imported silk tie, and takes a deliberate step away from Vivian, physically distancing himself from the sinking ship. "You got her fine," Bradley says, his voice adopting a sickeningly casual, transactional tone. "You proved your point, Naomi, but do not think for a second you have me trapped in this mess. I am filing for divorce from Chloe tomorrow morning. I am cashing out my personal portfolio, and I am leaving the state by the weekend. You can have this pathetic family. You cannot touch me." A short, sharp laugh escapes my throat. The sheer audacity of his cowardice is almost breathtaking. He is willing to discard his wife, my golden child half-sister, the very second the family vault runs dry. Evelyn does not say a word. She simply steps forward and drops a thick, heavy manila envelope directly onto the table in front of him. "You are not going anywhere, Bradley," I state, my voice dropping to a glacial, uncompromising chill. Bradley stares at the envelope, his false bravado faltering. He reaches out with trembling fingers, tears open the flap, and pulls out the stack of documents. The seal of the federal government glares back at him. That is a federal subpoena, I explain, watching his eyes dart frantically across the dense legal text. Wire fraud across state lines. Did you honestly believe you could gamble away $17 million of corporate funds without the Securities and Exchange Commission noticing? Did you think moving the money through offshore shell companies in the Caymans made you invisible? Bradley's face turns the color of ash. He drops the papers onto the table as if they are burning his hands. You left a digital paper trail a mile wide. I continue leaning forward, refusing to give him a single inch of breathing room. You routed the money through Vanguard's subsidiary accounts. My legal team audited those accounts 3 days ago. We expedited the tip to the authorities complete with all the necessary bank routing numbers, IP addresses, and your personal digital signatures. The FBI field office has already frozen your passport. If you try to board a plane, step onto a train, or cross state lines, you will be arrested on the spot. Bradley's knees buckle. He collapses backward into the heavy leather chair, completely and utterly defeated. The arrogant, untouchable executive who spent the last decade mocking my career choices is now gasping for air, staring down the barrel of a 20-year federal prison sentence. I stand up, smoothing the front of my blazer. I look down at the two of them, absorbing the absolute devastation I have wrought upon the people who made my childhood a living nightmare. There is no guilt. There is only a profound, long overdue sense of justice. By the way, Vivian, I add, tossing the words over my shoulder as I turn toward the grand double doors. Vivian flinches, her red, swollen eyes darting up to meet mine. Since I now officially control the family's holding company, I have executed a complete financial restructuring. I inform her, keeping my tone strictly professional, which only highlights the cruelty of the message. I have canceled all of your black cards. Your American Express Centurion is currently registering as stolen. Your VIP lines of credit at Bergdorf Goodman and Neiman Marcus have been permanently revoked. And this country club, I bought the management company yesterday. I have already instructed the front desk to terminate your membership effective immediately. You cannot even charge a glass of water to your tab on the way out. Vivian lets out a strangled, pathetic gasp, clutching her diamond necklace as if trying to hold on to her disappearing wealth. Oh, and one more thing, I say, pausing with my hand on the brass door handle. The eviction team is at the mansion right now. Vivian stops breathing entirely. They arrived 15 minutes ago. I clarify, glancing at my watch. They are currently boxing up the imported vases, taking inventory of the art collection, and putting padlocks on the master suite doors. You have exactly until midnight tonight to vacate my property. You are allowed one suitcase of personal clothing. If you attempt to remove a single piece of jewelry, art, or furniture purchased with my mother's money, I will have the police waiting at the end of the driveway to arrest you for grand larceny. Vivian opens her mouth, a silent scream dying in her throat as the totality of her ruin finally crushes her. She has lost her business, her status, her credit, and her home in the span of 30 minutes. I push the heavy mahogany doors open, stepping out into the quiet, pristine hallway of the country club. The air feels infinitely cleaner out here. But before I can take another step, Bradley's cell phone begins to ring, breaking the silence of the dining room. I glance back. Bradley stares blindly at the glowing screen. The caller ID flashes brightly, demanding attention. It is Chloe, my beautiful, permanently pampered younger sister who used to host lavish pool parties at that mansion and intentionally leave my name off the guest list. She is the one who laughed when my father refused to pay for my college tuition, claiming the family resources were tied up in vital investments. Answer it, Bradley. I suggest, a cold smile touching my lips. I imagine she is standing in the foyer right now, watching a dozen men in suits repossess her designer shoe collection. She is going to need her husband to explain why they are suddenly homeless. I let the heavy doors swing shut behind me, cutting off the sound of Vivian's renewed sobbing. I walk down the grand staircase, my heels clicking a steady, victorious rhythm against the marble, leaving the ashes of their empire far behind me. The drive back to the heart of the city takes less than 20 minutes, but the atmosphere outside transforms entirely. The heavy, stagnant humidity that had been choking Atlanta all afternoon finally breaks. I watch through the tinted windows of my town car as the sky bruises into a violent, turbulent shade of purple. A low, ominous rumble of thunder vibrates through the chassis of the vehicle just before the heavens open up. A torrential downpour begins to batter the pavement, washing the streets clean with a sudden aggressive force. The weather perfectly mirrors the absolute destruction I have just unleashed upon the people who tormented me for a lifetime. I step out of my private elevator and walk directly into the sanctuary of my penthouse. The space is a stark contrast to the gaudy, suffocating opulence of the Pierce mansion. There are no heavy gold fixtures here, no imported tapestries bought with embezzled funds, no portraits designed to project a fake legacy. My home is a quiet expanse of sleek steel polished concrete and minimalist glass. It is entirely paid for by my own hands. I shed the tailored armor of my business suit, leaving it draped over a chair in my dressing room. I strip away the day and change into a set of simple black silk loungewear. The fabric feels cool and incredibly soft against my skin, a physical reminder of my autonomy. In the immaculate kitchen, I set the electric kettle to boil. The sharp, citrusy scent of bergamot from loose-leaf Earl Grey tea fills the quiet air. I pour the steaming water into a delicate porcelain cup, savoring the rhythmic, soothing sound. Carrying the warm cup in both hands, I walk over to the vast floor-to-ceiling windows that line the entire western wall of my living room. I stand there in the pristine silence, watching the rain violently lash against the thick glass. Below me, the sprawling grid of Atlanta is a blurred canvas of glittering streetlights and crawling traffic, periodically illuminated by massive jagged forks of purple lightning. The silence of my home is profound, but my mind easily fills in the blanks of the chaos currently unfolding miles away. I know exactly what is happening at the mansion. My transition team is ruthless and highly efficient. Evelyn had already sent me a brief, satisfying text message confirming their arrival. I picture the scene with crystal clarity. The team of auditors and security personnel locking down the perimeter. Vivian collapsing into hysterics as strangers meticulously box up the diamonds she purchased with my mother's money. Marcus standing in his study, completely paralyzed, watching his fabricated empire being cataloged and confiscated piece by piece. I imagine Chloe, pampered and utterly useless, throwing a massive tantrum as her designer wardrobes are locked away, only to find out her black cards have all been declined. And Bradley, terrified and cornered, desperately trying to call defense attorneys, who will refuse to take his case once they realize his accounts are frozen by the federal government. The eviction notice was never a negotiation. It was an absolute mandate. They are losing everything they stole, everything they hoarded, and everything they used to make me feel small. I take a slow sip of my tea. The warmth spreads pleasantly through my chest. For decades, they held all the cards. They dictated the rules, controlled the narrative, and demanded absolute submission. They laughed when they cut me off, assuming I would wither and fade away. They never anticipated that I would build a scythe and return to harvest what was mine. Time stretches comfortably in the quiet luxury of the penthouse. I watch the storm rage on, finding a deep, settling peace in the relentless downpour. At exactly 11:45, the secure intercom system mounted on the kitchen wall buzzes. It is a harsh, jarring sound that shatters the tranquility of the room. It buzzes a second time, longer and more desperate. I do not rush. I take another deliberate sip of my tea, feeling the steam warm my face before slowly walking over to the digital security panel. I tap the screen once, activating the live feed from the ground floor security gate. The high-definition camera cuts through the darkness and the driving rain. The visual on the glowing screen is a masterpiece of poetic justice. Standing outside the heavy glass doors of my building, completely exposed to the torrential downpour, are four figures. They have no umbrellas. They have no luxury vehicles waiting at the curb. They are thoroughly, miserably drenched. Vivian is shivering violently. Her heavily sprayed perfect hair is plastered flat against her skull, and dark tracks of ruined mascara run down her cheeks. She is clutching a single small overnight bag to her chest. Beside her, Chloe looks completely unrecognizable. She is wrapped in a soaking wet trench coat, her arms crossed tight, crying openly as the freezing rain beats down on her. Bradley stands slightly apart from them, looking pale, sickly, and utterly defeated. He keeps glancing over his shoulder at the dark street, jumping at every passing pair of headlights as if expecting federal agents to emerge from the shadows. And then there is Marcus, the great titan of industry, the man who demanded absolute obedience and measured a person's worth entirely by their bank account, looks like a hollowed-out shell. His expensive suit is soaked through, hanging heavy and shapeless on his aging frame. His shoulders are severely slumped under the weight of the storm and the crushing reality of his total ruin. He reaches out a trembling, wrinkled hand and presses the buzzer again. They have nowhere else to go. Their credit lines are terminated. Their affluent friends have undoubtedly abandoned them after seeing the evening news exposing their massive fraud. They have come to the very person they spent a lifetime degrading, begging for a lifeline. I watch them huddle together on the screen, a ruined family stripped of their stolen wealth, their fake prestige, and their arrogant pride. I raise my porcelain cup. I bring the rim to my lips and take a slow, highly satisfying sip of the hot Earl Grey tea. I do not press the button to unlock the door. I do not speak into the microphone. I simply stand in the quiet warmth of my penthouse, watching the bright screen, and I let them wait in the rain. I reach out and press the silver button on the intercom panel authorizing the private elevator. The heavy metallic clunk echoes through the quiet penthouse, a definitive sound of access granted. I do not walk out to meet them at the elevator banks. I remain standing in the center of my immaculate marble foyer, holding my warm cup of Earl Grey tea, waiting in absolute stillness. The elevator chimes. The polished steel doors slide open. They step into my pristine home, a parade of absolute ruin. Water drips heavily from their clothes, pooling instantly around their ruined designer shoes and soaking into my imported rugs. I do not care about the rugs. The visual of their utter defeat is worth the price. Chloe pushes past her mother, her soaked trench coat squeaking against the marble floor. She turns violently on Bradley, her fists flying. She strikes his chest repeatedly, her voice shrill and grating against the quiet elegance of my home. "You ruined my life," she screams, her perfectly manicured nails catching on his soaked collar. "You gambled away my trust fund. You gambled away my house. I have a useless art history degree, Bradley. What am I supposed to do? I have $0 in my checking account." Bradley does not even flinch. He stands there dead-eyed, absorbing her blows as if he is already a ghost. The reality of a 20-year federal prison sentence has completely severed his connection to the present moment. He is an empty vessel, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his impending punishment. Vivian takes a step forward, and her knees simply buckle. The queen of Atlanta high society, the woman who once demanded security, throw me out of a dining room, drops directly onto my cold marble floor. The sound of her knees hitting the stone is sharp and pathetic. It is the ultimate humiliation for a woman whose entire identity was built on looking down at others. She covers her face with her trembling hands, her shoulders heaving with ugly, gasping sobs. She does not look up. She cannot bear to meet my eyes. She is reduced to a puddle of ruined silk and shattered arrogance. Marcus steps around his weeping wife. He looks ancient. The commanding posture, the ruthless corporate titan aura, the terrifying presence that dictated my entire childhood, all of it is completely gone. He is just a frail, wet old man shivering in the air conditioning of a penthouse he could never afford to buy. He raises a shaking hand toward me. "Daughter, please," he begs. His voice cracks, revealing a frail, reedy sound I have never heard from him before. "We have nowhere to go. We have nothing. My accounts are frozen. The house is locked. Please have mercy on your family." I do not step aside to let them in. I plant my feet firmly, standing my ground in the doorway. I look directly at the man who spent 30 years making sure I knew I was a disappointment. "You called me a failure, Dad," I say, my voice ringing clear and steady in the cavernous foyer. "You sat at the head of your dining table and told everyone I contributed nothing. You said my business was a joke. You said I lacked the Pierce vision. Look at you now. Look at all of you." Marcus lowers his trembling hand, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. You threw me out of the house because I refused to marry a business partner to secure a corporate merger for you. I continue the words flowing with decades of repressed clarity. You cut off my tuition because I wanted to build my own firm instead of becoming a subservient pawn in yours. You watched Vivian replace my mother's photographs, erase her legacy, and steal money from a charity foundation built in her name. And you did absolutely nothing because her high society connections were convenient for your public image. Naomi. I made mistakes. Marcus whispers, his eyes darting wildly. I was trying to protect the empire. I was trying to secure our legacy. You protected a lie, I shoot back, my voice turning to ice. And you funded it with absolute fraud. Vanguard acquisitions did not destroy your legacy, Marcus. You destroyed it the moment you let Bradley treat the corporate accounts like a personal casino and let Vivian treat a children's charity like her private bank account. I just bought the debt. I simply collected the bill. Chloe stops hitting Bradley and turns to me, her mascara running down her face in dark, ugly rivers. Naomi, please, she whines instantly, reverting to the helpless little sister routine she used whenever she needed to get out of trouble. We are your blood. You cannot just leave us on the street in a thunderstorm. I shift my cold gaze to her. You laughed when Dad cut me off, Chloe. You hosted lavish parties with my mother's jewelry wrapped around your neck. Blood means absolutely nothing to you unless it comes with a routing number and a limitless credit limit. Vivian lets out another loud wail from the floor, curling her body tighter into a ball. I set my teacup down on a small side table. The ceramic clink cuts sharply through the sound of the rain lashing against the windows. I reach into the console drawer by the door, retrieve a single plastic keycard, and toss it onto the floor. It lands with a soft clatter just inches from Vivian's wet knees. There is a budget motel off Interstate 85, I state calmly. I booked a single room with 2 double beds for exactly 3 nights. It is fully paid for. That gives you exactly 72 hours to figure out your next move before Bradley is indicted and the federal agents come to collect him. Marcus stares at the cheap plastic keycard resting on the marble. A budget motel. For a man who only slept in 5-star penthouse suites, it is a fate far worse than physical pain. Naomi, you cannot be serious, he breathes, looking at me with pure horror. I am deadly serious, I reply, my tone leaving zero room for negotiation. You always wanted me to learn how the real world works. You wanted me to understand the true cost of independence. Well, class is in session. Pick up the key. Marcus looks at me. He searches my face for any sign of hesitation, any lingering childhood desperate need for his approval. He finds nothing. He sees only the chief executive officer of Vanguard Acquisitions. Slowly, painfully, his stiff knees bend. The great Marcus Pierce lowers his body toward the wet floor, reaching out with a trembling hand to pick up the cheap plastic keycard. He grips it tightly, using the wall to pull his frail frame back to his feet. He does not look at me again. He turns to his ruined wife, his hysterical daughter, and his catatonic son-in-law. Let us go, he says, his voice entirely hollow. They turn around. They shuffle back into the elevator, a miserable, defeated procession, stripped of every lie they ever told. I watch the steel doors slide shut, sealing them away. The elevator descends, taking the last remnants of the Pierce family nightmare out of my life forever. I pick up my teacup, walk back to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and watch the storm wash the city clean. Marcus stares at the folder, his hands trembling violently. The rain beats down on them, relentlessly washing away the last remnants of their unearned pride. He reaches out slowly, painfully, and takes the waterproof folder from my hand. He flips it open, squinting through the downpour at the crisp legal documents. This is an employment contract, Marcus croaks out, his voice barely audible over the storm. It is your only option, I state, stepping slightly forward. If you want to avoid homelessness and complete public disgrace, you will accept the position. Vanguard Acquisitions is offering you a job as a guest greeter at the Pierce Pearl. Your salary will be exactly state minimum wage. You will have zero executive authority, no access to the corporate offices, and your primary duty will be opening doors for the guests you used to look down on. You will smile, Marcus. you will welcome them, and you will do it in a polyester uniform. Marcus's jaw drops. A minimum wage greeter, he gasps, his entire body shaking. In the hotel I built, I was the chief executive officer. You built nothing, I correct him, my voice turning to absolute ice. You took credit for my mother's vision. Now you will stand at the entrance and watch me run her legacy properly. I turn my gaze to Vivian. She is still kneeling on the wet pavement, sobbing uncontrollably. As for you, Vivian, I continue, your terms are equally non-negotiable. Vanguard has secured a tiny one-bedroom corporate-owned apartment in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Atlanta. That is where you will live. Furthermore, you are legally and permanently banned from ever stepping foot inside the Pierce Pearl, and you are forbidden from using the Pierce name for any profitable venture. Your days as a high society socialite are permanently terminated. You are effectively banished. Vivian lets out a strangled wail, burying her face in her hands. She does not even try to argue. She knows she has absolutely no leverage left. And me, Chloe, demands, her voice shrill and desperate as she pushes her wet hair out of her face. What about me? I did not do anything wrong. I am your sister. You are a parasite, Chloe, I reply coolly. Your trust fund is gone. Your luxury cars have been repossessed. You have zero marketable skills. However, I am not entirely uncharitable. Vanguard is offering you a junior human resources internship at the hotel. You will file paperwork, answer phones, and fetch coffee. If you perform well, you might earn enough to afford groceries. If you complain, you are fired. Chloe's eyes widen in sheer horror. An intern, she screeches. I cannot be an intern. I have an art history degree from an Ivy League university. Then you can appreciate the aesthetic beauty of the copy machine, I say, my tone devoid of any empathy. Take the internship or starve, Chloe. I genuinely do not care either way. Bradley steps forward, his face pale and slick with rain. And what is my deal? He asks, his voice shaking with terror. What is Vanguard offering me? I look at Bradley, letting a slow, lethal smile touch my lips. You get absolutely nothing. I state, my voice ringing out clearly over the thunder. You gambled away $17 million of corporate funds across state lines. You tried to sell out your father-in-law to the FBI to save your own skin. Vanguard is not offering you a lifeline. We are leaving you to face the federal prosecutors entirely on your own. You are radioactive, Bradley, and you are going to prison for a very long time. Bradley stumbles backward, clutching his chest as if he has been shot. He looks around wildly, seeking an escape that does not exist. Sign the documents, I demand, holding out a silver pen. My tone is absolute. Sign them right now out here in the freezing rain, or I withdraw the offers entirely, and you can all sleep under a bridge tonight. Marcus looks at me, his eyes filled with a hollow, defeated sorrow. He takes the pen from my hand. He presses it to the wet paper, his signature shaky and unrecognizable compared to the bold scrawl he used to authorize multi-million-dollar deals. He hands the pen to Vivian, who signs through her hysterical sobbing, without even looking at the terms. Chloe snatches the pen, next glaring at me with pure hatred, as she signs her name, silently accepting her new reality as an intern. I do not offer the pen to Bradley. He has nothing left to sign away. I reach out and pull the folder back, snapping it shut. I hand it to Evelyn, who slides it securely under her jacket. I look at the four of them standing in the torrential downpour, completely stripped of their wealth, their status, and their arrogance. The empire they stole has been reclaimed. The legacy they tarnished has been restored. Goodbye, Marcus, I say quietly. I step back inside, pulling the heavy door shut. The loud, definitive click of the deadbolt locking into place echoes through the quiet foyer. I turn away from the door, leaving them standing alone in the dark, freezing rain, to finally face the consequences of their actions. The storm breaks just before dawn, washing away the oppressive heat and the lingering stench of my father's desperate pride. By the time the sun crests over the Atlanta skyline, the air is crisp, cool, and undeniably clean. I stand on the bustling sidewalk directly across the street from the grand entrance of the hotel, holding a fresh cup of black coffee. The morning traffic rushes past me, a blur of commuters, completely oblivious to the empire-altering shift that occurred while the city slept. I tilt my head back, squinting against the brilliant, unfiltered sunlight, and lock my eyes on the massive construction crane looming high above the building's stone facade. The heavy machinery hums a low, powerful vibration that I can feel through the soles of my shoes. Slowly, with surgical precision, the crane operator lowers the massive, tarnished gold letters that have stained this building for decades. One by one, the heavy metal characters spelling out the pierced pearl are detached from the stone. The letter P is the first to go swinging slightly in the morning breeze before being lowered onto a flatbed truck waiting on the street below. Then the I. Then the E. I watched the deliberate dismantling of the false legacy Marcus spent 30 years trying to force down the city's throat. He wanted his name carved in stone, a monument to a dynasty he stole rather than built. He wanted everyone to believe he was the mastermind, the self-made titan of industry. Now his name is just scrap metal, destined for a salvage yard. The crane operator signals the ground crew. The final letter is unbolted and lowered away. The stone facade is completely blank. The physical erasure of my toxic family is absolute and permanent. A moment later, a second flatbed truck pulls into the loading zone carrying cargo that catches the morning light so fiercely it almost hurts to look at it. A crew of workers begins hoisting up a brand new gleaming platinum sign. The modern minimalist font is elegant and razor-sharp. I do not take my eyes off the crane as the workers secure the massive letters to the freshly cleaned stone. I let out a long, slow breath, a breath I feel like I have been holding since I was a child, as the full name is finally revealed to the city. The Josephine. It is no longer a monument to a weak man's fragile ego. It is a tribute to the brilliant visionary Black woman who actually laid the foundation for this entire enterprise. It is my mother's hotel. It always was. Now the rest of the world will finally know it. A sleek black town car pulls up to the curb beside me. Evelyn steps out looking sharp and impeccably rested in a tailored navy suit, but she is not alone. The newly appointed general manager of the Josephine walks briskly out of the glass front doors, bypassing the valet, and heading straight toward me. He hands me a sleek digital tablet, his face splitting into a massive, genuine smile. "The transition is completely seamless, Ms. Pierce," he reports, his voice practically vibrating with excitement. "The financial accounts are entirely secured under Vanguard and the staff morale is through the roof. But you need to see the morning revenue reports." I take the tablet and swipe through the financial dashboards. The numbers are staggering. With the elimination of Vivian's offshore skimming accounts and Bradley's fraudulent corporate expenses, millions of dollars have been immediately injected back into the operating budget. The Josephine is not just solvent, it is incredibly profitable. Evelyn taps the screen, pulling up a digital news feed. The Atlanta Chronicle ran the exclusive at midnight, she says, her tone deeply satisfied. It is trending nationally across every major financial network. I read the bold headline flashing across the screen. Vanguard Acquisitions executes brilliant takeover. Naomi Pierce reclaims mother's legacy amidst massive embezzlement scandal. The article is a masterpiece of corporate journalism. It praises Vanguard's aggressive surgical precision. It hails me as a visionary in Black generational wealth preservation. It also paints a devastating, undeniable picture of Bradley and Vivian's fraudulent activities. The comments section is a complete bloodbath. High society Atlanta is absolutely tearing them apart. They are not just ruined financially, they are social pariahs. No country club, no charity gala, and no elite restaurant will ever let them through the door again. I hand the tablet back to the general manager and turn my attention back to the hotel. The Josephine gleams in the morning light, a fortress of glass and stone fully cleansed of the parasites that tried to bleed it dry. I step off the curb and cross the street, Evelyn falling into step slightly behind me. I walk through the grand revolving glass doors and step into the sprawling, opulent lobby. It is the exact same lobby where just a few days ago Vivian ordered security to throw me out like common trash. The atmosphere has completely transformed. The heavy, oppressive tension created by Marcus's paranoid micromanagement is entirely gone. The staff moves with a renewed, efficient energy, their heads held high. They are no longer walking on eggshells, terrified of Chloe throwing a tantrum, or Vivian firing someone over a misplaced flower arrangement. As I walk across the polished marble floor, the front desk manager stops what she is doing. She stands up completely straight, offering a respectful, genuine smile. "Good morning, Ms. Pierce," she says clearly, her voice echoing perfectly in the grand space. "Welcome to the Josephine." "Good morning," I reply, returning her smile with a profound sense of peace. I walk toward the private executive elevators, feeling the solid, reassuring weight of the building around me. I did not just survive the people who tried to break me. I did not just endure their endless insults, their financial sabotage, and their desperate attempts to erase me. I conquered them. I dismantled their stolen empire from the inside out, and I built my own fortress on top of the ruins. The elevator doors slide open. I step inside, turning to face the lobby as the doors begin to close. The gleaming platinum letters of the Josephine reflect in the glass a promise kept and a future secured. I hold the empire my mother truly built. It is cleansed of parasites and finally completely mine.